Yeah,
Yes.
it says started. Yeah. Okay, hi guys, welcome to the live show for Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, which I'm sure you all know is this book here. So we are going to go into a little bit of a discussion about all of the different areas of this massive, enormous book. If you don't know, I should probably tell you that I'm Becca. This is my channel, as you probably know if you're on it. And my relationship with Game of Thrones is that I have been putting it off for a very, very long time because it's a hefty series. But I did really enjoy it. I gave it 5 stars. I'm also up to date on the show, which is why I was kind of desperate to read this, hopefully this year. So now we're just going to run through the hosts and everyone's going to introduce themselves, starting with, I don't know, anybody want to go first? Rachel?
Yeah, so hi, my name's Rachel. I have the channel Rachel Marie Book Junkie. This is my first time trying to, let's start from scratch. This is my second time trying to read the series. The first time I tried to read it was when I was in university, and I think I got maybe like 20% of the way through, but like mental health was not good back then. And I was just like, it's just not the read for me. So I put it down. And then we were all talking about doing a live show for this, doing a read along for it. And I was like, okay, it's about time that I picked it up again. I've watched all the series a number of times because I'm the kind of person that rewatches these things. And just reading it now for like the first time and having finished the book, it's amazing, and I've really enjoyed it. Like Becca said, we've all given it 5 stars. And yeah, I can't wait to discuss it with you all. And I guess I'll pass the mic over to Cody.
Hi guys, I'm Cody. My channel is Cody's Book Corner, and this is a reread for me. So I read these books back when I was in university too, like Rachel, and I loved them back then, and then got into the show. I'm caught up on the show. I cannot wait for April. Kind of bummed that we're getting the finale of the show before we're getting the last book, but you know, it's fine. But yeah, that's my experience with Game of Thrones. As Rachel said, I gave it a 5 stars as well. I love this world, I love these characters, and I'm just very happy to be actually properly discussing them with people for the first time and swapping theories and all of that stuff.
Ryan?
Yeah, so hello. This is my first time reading Game of Thrones. I have watched the TV series, so I do know like the events of the books. But it's just interesting to get the original idea, and just to see if there's anything that's changed, anything that's different from the books, anything that's different from the show that might be like done differently in the books, and it's interesting to see that. So yeah, and I'm loving it so far. So woo. Okay, so I guess I'll pass over to Ashley.
Well, my name is Ashley. My channel is Don't Have a Degree in Reading, and this is a 4th reread for me. Wow. Surprisingly, I'd never heard of the series. I actually watched the TV show first, the very first season, and my mind was blown. And then I found out it was a series, completely gobbled it up. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. So I'm going through it with a very, very critical eye. I'm actually rewatching the show as we speak. So I'm just ready to discuss this because I have wanted to do something like this since I started BookTube in 2015. And so when Becca asked me to be a part of this, I was like, hell yes.
Okay, and then Zafina, last.
Hiya, my name's Zafina, or Pravi, and I'm from the channel The Psychonix. My experience with Game of Thrones is that basically this is my 3rd reread, and I've watched the show. Well, I'm just about to finish my 3rd rewatch of the show up to now, so like I love it so much. And yeah, I just can't wait to talk about it critically, especially.
Okay, so the way that we're going to do this is I know that a lot of people who have taken part in the read along have not watched the show up to date. So for the first section of this live show, we're going to talk about just the book and what happens in the first book. And then we're going to do a section later on that has like the foreshadowing and what we think the text of the first book means about what's going to happen in the show or what has happened in the show much later on. So we will let you know when we are about to go into that section so that you can leave if you don't want any spoilers, which sounds really rude. Like I don't want you to leave, but if you don't want to be spoiled, essentially. So I think the first thing that Zafina especially wanted to talk about was the setting of the book.
Okie dokie. So I feel like we can all kind of agree that when we tend to think about fantasy, especially high fantasy, there seems to be this stereotype of the Western medieval setting. You know, you've got these castles, you've got the same lords, kings, monarchy, that kind of rule. And I just thought it would be interesting to maybe discuss it, how we received it, and how we think it's handled within Martin's own universe.
Mm.
That's a pretty
So
good question.
yeah. I definitely have something here that I'd like to bring up, and that's obviously if we're in this kind of Western medieval world and you're dealing with those kind of contexts, you're also dealing with the fact that Westeros is meant to be some kind of parallel to like Western Europe, and therefore the characters are mainly white. It's something that I definitely noticed with this, that when we're definitely in Westeros, for the most part, all the characters are white and they're like upper to middle class. And then any characters that were darker that were mentioned were either prostitutes or they lived on the other side of like the whole world that he's created, and they were Dothraki. And the Dothraki had darker skin, the almond-shaped eyes, the black hair, and they had these animalistic type qualities. And I know that it's what he imagined for the world, but for me, like if you're creating a world from scratch, did you really need to not be inclusive and to not go and add those? We've not met people from Dawn yet, and I know that that's probably, you know, separate. You've got the darker skinned kind of Spaniards in a sense, but it's just something that I really noticed, and I know that he's trying to keep hold of like the medieval world in that respect. But I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
I always think that there's like a fine line with these things, because first off, like I think it was written in like 95-ish, like around the mid-90s. So things were more well, not acceptable, it's never acceptable, but it was never picked up on then, like inclusivity and things like that. And I've noticed things like he treats the women appallingly, whether they're main characters or side characters or prostitutes, whatever they are, they're generally treated terribly. And it's hard because as reviewers, do we comment on this and say, look, like this isn't on like in fantasy, as it's a fantastical world, even though it's reminiscent of medieval times? Like, do we say like it's not acceptable for you to do these things anymore, or do we excuse it because it is reminiscent of the time period? Because I'm more along the lines of, well, medieval times were like that, but it is a fantastical world, so is it necessary, really?
I think that this kind of goes into like the kind of mindset you go in when you read. And I feel like, especially with this book, considering like we are going to talk about the narrative, the way we're perceiving things is we tend to look at things from, you know, not an objective perspective completely. We tend to look at it kind of from the character's perspective, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But I feel like you kind of have to be an active reader, and you have to kind of acknowledge that this is a very patriarchal society, and like we can all agree that's kind of how society was, especially with how the institutions are laid out, you know, everything going to the male heir, stuff like that. And that's where the significance of Daenerys and these other female characters, and I know Brienne isn't mentioned in this first book, but she comes in later, and we see George like abstracting away from this initial idea he's created. And on what you said, Rachel, about race, I definitely agree. The Dothraki are so animalistic, you know, they ride women from behind and stuff like that. But oh my god, that sounded so weird.
But they do.
Oh, Drogo is sat on like Daenerys. But what I mean is just like, yeah, they definitely have that animalistic nature, but I think we do, like, there's this mention of like Bravos and Lys and all these other places where, especially when we see in the show, they are people that are tan and then of darker complexions, and they are way more like advanced than the Westerosi, who kind of are a bit backward thinking in general. So I feel like that's something that's definitely explored more in the later books, but I think with this, the not the contrast between what Daenerys is going through and this civil society which everyone else is Westeros is going through, I think that's really key in showing her progression. And I feel like if she was brought up in that kind of civil society, she wouldn't have that progression and that strength that she does by the end of the book.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything to say on the setting?
Sorry, just really quick. What year was this book released? The first book.
I think it was 1995 or 96.
Yeah, 96, I think.
So going off that, let's say it's 25 years ago, give or take. Like times were different then, and people, like the generations have changed. So we are all a younger generation, and we are more sensitive now than like when this book was released. So I feel like times have changed. Like if you look at the older generations in the world, like they talk about things differently to what we do. So I feel like that kind of comes across in it as well.
Yeah, I think it's important as well to kind of keep in mind what's the demographic for these books, because I don't think George R.R. Martin was going to be writing these for very young people, obviously, to read, or people to grow up reading, which is what I ended up doing. So maybe he was doing it for all the traditional, older white gentlemen who he maybe predicted were the majority of the audience. But I also think it's quite interesting to kind of see that it is built around the War of the Roses and the 100 Years' War as well. So maybe that is why the setting is so white, because that's the way Europe was then. Maybe he kept it quite close to that. But I do agree with you, Zaf, as well, about the female characters in here as well. It definitely feels like he has to put them through some kind of trauma before they have some kind of character growth, whereas a lot of the men are immediately portrayed as they don't need to have that trauma to be the people that they are. So I agree. I get that.
Plots and points has put in the chat. Also, don't forget that we see other cultures through the eyes of the Westerosi, which I think is sort of explains a lot of it, especially the descriptions of the Dothraki, because it's like essentially it is like an omniscient narrator, but it is also told from the perspective of the characters from a more Western lens, I think, and how people expect a Western culture to view other cultures, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
what I was going to say.
Okay,
earlier,
so
hello, people hear me?
Go on, Ashley, go on.
Well, we were talking about the whole race thing, but then once you actually start to think about the age of the characters themselves, I mean, Dany was only 13 when all of this started happening. So it's all kind of disturbing to think about that these kids, I mean, they're children, but, taking during the medieval times, that was manhood, that was womanhood. So, I mean, as long as you go into it knowing that it is fiction, but it's also mirroring our own history, I think it's okay. Well, not okay, but example and talk about it and things like that, like we are now.
Yeah, Keeping Tabs has just said in the chat, she said, even though women are treated horribly in this book, Martin created a lot of female characters who are fighting the stereotypes of this world. And I think that's definitely what Safina was saying earlier about how Daenerys is like a source of progression. It's something that we'll see her fighting against. And we've seen it, some of us that have seen the show, but also her progression within this book, from being this small 13-year-old who's, under the thumb of her horrible brother, an abusive brother, and then her taking this power onto herself and speaking to her handmaids about how she's meant to seduce her Dothraki husband, how she's meant to please him, and learning those things and taking that power into herself. And the end chapter, oh my God, like seeing her from her first chapter to her end chapter was insane for character arcs.
Yeah, definitely. I also think it's quite nice to have Aya from the start being kind of boisterous and being that opposite to Sansa, that completely opposite way. And her relationship with Jon,
I love Arya's feistiness and how she just like fights back against everything that's expected of her.
I feel like you can definitely see like the other three women, essentially Arya, Sansa, their children, but still like the other three females, they are so young, just like Daenerys. They have so much developing to do, and they do develop. And I feel like the main thing when we look at Kat, for example, is that she's so set in her ways, and even though she's not from the North, she does kind of hold the biases of the North in the sense that she tends to, I don't want to say she's simplistic, but she seems to hold these kind of more simplistic biases. She's very, very skeptical, and, things are the way they are. And you can definitely see that in how Ned and Catelyn view Varys, you know. And we were talking earlier about how, you know, there's this lens where, you know, this Western lens looking on these other cultures who seem more primitive and whatnot. But like Varys, even though he's basically white, is still an example of that, considering because he's a eunuch, there's all these superstitions about him and stuff like that. So it's like, it's not like the characters that we like, especially Ned. I adore him, but it's not like he's faultless. And I feel like that is because of how he was brought up and where he was brought up.
I feel like a lot of this about the ages of the characters, sorry, is attributed to the writing style as well, because I've noticed with George R.R. Martin's writing style that he's very impartial, and he will describe all of the characters doing atrocious things, yet some of them we like and some of them we don't like. And I found that that was a very interesting standpoint for a narrator to come from, in that he tells all of these stories without seeming to have much bias. But there are still bad characters and good characters. Like, obviously, most of us know that later in the series, it is a little bit more grey. But I feel like in the first book, there is definitely a clear divide in like the good characters and the bad ones.
Mm-hmm. I think it definitely goes into the idea that no one views themselves as the bad guy. And like, you've got all these people with their own motives, but no one's looking at themselves like, I am integrally, like, within myself, I am a bad person, apart from the Hound. But that's because his whole character arc is really perceiving himself as less than. But that's like character discussion. We'll leave it there for now.
Yeah,
Anybody have? Sorry. Go on, Rachel.
Because you were kind of talking about writing style there and his narration style. And so it's definitely something that I found as well. Even though you say that he was rather impartial, I've seen characters that I feel that he connected to in a way that he was able to embody them in the chapter. So some of the Sansa chapters, for instance, he's really got in her head and he really understands her, and her bitterness towards her younger sister, and why can't I just do this, and why can't everybody feel and see the world the way I do, and this is my beautiful handsome prince and he's so wonderful. And we see a lot of some characters' internal dialogues more than others. And I don't know whether I'm not going to cast aspersions on who George R.R. Martin is, but I've definitely seen some chapters him getting a little bit more involved with characters, and seeing their thought processes. Tyrion less so. I think Tyrion comes out with like the quips, and I said before, like Tyrion the quotable, he's just insane. But I think internal dialogue wise, I've seen a lot of the connection with Sansa, which I wasn't expecting.
I feel like he is strong. Like, I feel like this is a good moment for us to move on to narrative, Becca.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like he makes it a bit more clear in showing that, you know, third person limited narrative within his chapters where he's talking about younger characters, because I feel like Arya, Sansa, Bran, we can definitely feel their childishness and even Jon's petulance quite often. Meanwhile, Daenerys, we see her innocence, but we see it change, you know. But when we have characters like Catelyn, Ned, and Tyrion, who are obviously significantly older, we don't get that, you know, inner dialogue as much and how they perceive the world. You know, like they don't necessarily indicate too much. Like there's a lot of subconscious indication of how they feel about people rather than, you know, fully explicit. At least that's how I took it, if anyone was to disagree.
Anybody?
No.
Okay, I feel like what I said about the impartialness, I'm thinking, like, just to give an example, the scene of Khal Drogo and Dany's wedding night. Obviously, Dany is 13, and the way that we read that, we should read that as being like a terrible, terrible thing, because I think he's around 30. But the way that it's written, it's kind of like I'm not sure if it like romanticizes it, but it in the show, I believe it's depicted as a rape scene more than it is in the book, although I don't remember because it's a while ago since I watched it.
I remember.
It definitely is.
But it's just the way that he's written it, it's kind of like you can make your own mind up because we're quite aware of the facts, but at the same time, it's not as repulsive as it is when you lay down the facts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Like,
That's kind of how I felt when Cersei was talking to Ned about her and Jaime's relationship, and she was talking about how they are one person and everything like that. And I was like, oh my God, that is so sweet. And then I'm like, that's her brother, her twin brother.
I have the quote written down for this, if you don't mind me just jumping in here if I can find it. So Ned says, your brother or your lover? And she says both. She did not flinch from the truth. And she says, since we were children together, and why not? The Targaryens wed brother to sister for 300 years to keep the bloodlines pure. And Jaime and I are more than brother and sister. We are one person in two bodies. We shared a womb together. He came into this world holding my foot, our old maester said, and when he is in me, I feel whole. The ghost of a smile flitted over her lips.
It's weird because the way that she says that makes it sound like it's more romantic, but when I hear that, it just makes it creepier to me.
So I wrote down grotesque, but I understand where she's coming from, because it's meant to be beautiful and this powerful connection.
Yeah, but that just makes it all more creepier.
She really hits it home when she says we share the womb. Like,
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
When he is in me, I feel whole.
Oh.
I also feel like it's a great juxtaposition between the Dany and Khal Drogo thing with like the huge age gap, and then the incest. And the incest is viewed negatively, but the massive age gap is like fine. And it's just like Game of Thrones is just so strange.
And the fact that she was basically sold to him by her brother as well.
Oh yeah,
that wasn't a
yeah.
consensual wedding. That was just like, this is your husband now. Go for it.
Oh dear. While we're talking about this kind of topic, what did everybody think of the chapter that I like to call Dany's Sexual Awakening, where the tone is very different at the beginning than it is at the end? So I think it starts off as very much rape, and then it turns into acceptance, and then her controlling the sexual relationship. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I'm pretty sure I wrote something down, but I honestly can't find the chapter right now, so bear with me.
Okay.
I'll just jump in while you're doing that. Basically, I do feel like she's kind of reclaiming the situation in a way. Well, we see that more so in the next Dany chapter after this Dany 2 chapter. I'm pretty sure it's the second chapter, wherein she basically loses her virginity. And it's like, as gross as we might think it is, it's like, this isn't necessarily spoilers for the next book, but in the next book, Sansa has the same issue in that it said that when Sansa bleeds, she's going to be, it's time for her to get married, And so Dany's already had that instance. So it's like, it can't be one rule for Sansa. Just because her and Joffrey are of a similar age range, we have to take into account the time period. We had the same history of time period. So yes, pedophilia is fucked up. I'm not trying to pretend it's not. But it's like, in these books, you kind of have to like take that out of your mind and look at what's normalized within the society. Yeah. And there's definitely some things that are fucked up that are normalized within the society, but it's how the characters receive them. Essentially, like with Cersei and Jaime's thing, I just wanted to call in is like, I've read this book recently called The God of Small Things, and it literally was about two twins, brother and sister, and at the end of the book they end up banging. That's how I want to say it. And the entire book is talking about how they feel so hollow, no one else can understand them, they can only understand each other, they're united in a way that no one's gonna get, and then they literally physically embody that relationship. So maybe that kind of affected how I perceived Jaime and Cersei's, but I don't know. Like, don't get me, it's gross, but it's like, I would understand it more if she wasn't banging her cousin.
Yeah.
I feel like all of that love and all of that romance and all of that, you would think it's this true love. It doesn't feel as real because she's banging her cousin also.
Yeah, sorry, just going back
to...
to...
carry on.
No. I was just going to say, all I have written down for that chapter he was on about with Dany is just a chapter of growth. So that's all I have, but it completely agrees with what you were saying.
Yeah, I think Cersei is a very interesting character in that she, like you just said, Zafina, how she has this, like, all-consuming love for her brother, yet she's also banging Lancel. And she's very much a power player, but she has this relationship with her family that's it's very twisted, but then she also in some ways values her family more than anything else. And as the series goes on, as I'm sure we'll discuss later, Cersei becomes a much more complex character, and she becomes one of my favorite characters. But just from the first book, she's already a lot more complex than I expected her to be in just this one book.
Yeah, I definitely forgot the amount of abuse she kind of gets from Robert as well. And the whole kind of core of that, the reason that she hates him so much isn't necessarily because he's a bad king or because he treats her this way. It's more so because he could never love her as much as he loves Lyanna. Like, there's a part in the book where he basically says, you know, there was never going to be anything between us two because you'll never be her. So that's kind of like her main bitterness, I found, came from that more so. Just random cat, sorry.
There's definitely this insult she feels also, because there's the aspect of Robert basically always having this comparison in the back of his head that Lyanna was the best thing ever and no one will compare. But she used to have dreams of Rhaegar. She wanted to be with Rhaegar. And Rhaegar, like, there's this entire plotline essentially that Rhaegar apparently raped Lyanna. I'm not saying anything, but there's this entire plotline, and even then, even though it is, you know, everyone says it's rape, the fact that he still chose Lyanna, the fact that that entire tourney happened wherein, you know, Lyanna got the roses, it wasn't her. It's like she's been rejected by the man she wanted to be with and the one she dreamed of about in her childhood, and then also by the one she's had to settle for. So it's just like, you can't, it's like, I feel like her Stark hatred isn't just from, you know, the truth being revealed or whatnot. It is definitely this enmity she feels towards, like, you know, this bloodline that has caused her so much despair and jealousy.
Yeah, totally. It's also quite interesting as well if you think about what sparked Robert to go and, you know, go into battle and take the crown basically away from the Mad King, was the fact that Rhaegar raped Lyanna. That was kind of that extra boost it took for him to actually go ahead and do that. So basically he has his kingdom now because of, you know, he wanted that revenge against the Mad King and the Targaryens basically. So Cersei's obviously going to be feeling a kind of way about that too, probably.
Definitely.
I think Robert's quite interested in the fact that he seems to be very much living in the past, and he has been for the last, is it like 20 years since he took the throne?
15?
He's still obsessed with Lyanna, and he still has such a burning hatred of the Targaryens because of Rhaegar. And like the fact of the matter is, like, Lyanna was not as committed as to the relationship as Robert was, but I'm wondering if he had no idea, or whether he is just so blind to it that he's still so into this. Like, he rejects Cersei even though Lyanna's long dead, and like the reality is he's known Cersei a lot longer than he's known Lyanna at this point, but he's just so stuck in that moment from 20 years ago.
It was even on his deathbed, he said to Ned, wasn't it, that like, I'll say hello to Lyanna for you, like, I'll be with her. And it's like, okay,
you think you're going in the same place she is? Nah, mate, nah. I feel like one of the main things as well is kind of like, I think this was a point you made, Cody, that he's like stuck in the past and everything, and that what caused him to go in was the death of Lyanna. I can't remember who made that point, but it's kind of like, it also goes to show how he rules. He did not rule to be king. He does not know how to be king. He's an absolutely terrible king. And it was about time someone was going to do something about it. If it wasn't going to, well, okay, we see lots of moments that are indicative of the fact that there are people who are already undermining him right under his nose. And this entire conflict with the Starks is just propelling that forward. And if anything, complicated those moments towards changing who's on the throne. Anyone agree or disagree?
no?
Nope, agree.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. So I know that we all had a particular character that we wanted to discuss in detail, and we have been talking about characters generally now, but are we all ready to move on to characters?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have something that I kind of thought was common knowledge or like a shared opinion, but when I briefly mentioned it earlier, I have already met some opposition. So we'll kick off with my thoughts on Ned. Now, I thought when I was reading Ned's later chapters, I felt that while Ned was always trying to do the right thing, like the Honourable Ned Stark, he brought his own death and the downfall of his own house on himself because he put his honour above his family. So the two main points that I have as evidence for this is that after Robert dies, Renly comes to him and he says, we should kidnap the children and then Cersei won't be able to move against us because we will have her children as hostage. And he says, no, I'm not kidnapping children. And as a result of that, Renly flees and he loses Renly's support. Then after that, Littlefinger comes to him, and I think Littlefinger tells him to allow Joffrey to be king and support him and teach Joffrey to rule in the way that Ned thinks is right. And Ned says, no, because Joffrey isn't the true king, I'm not going to do that, which leads to Littlefinger betraying him, that then leads to Ned being arrested because Cersei finds out what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I personally think that Ned brought everything on himself, even though he was trying to do the right thing. And then I got real like deep in my feels and thought, that's often the way the world works, you know, if you do the right thing, you don't always end up on top. So anybody have any thoughts about Ned?
Okay. Oh, no, go on.
I agree with you to an extent, which we'll get into later when I talk about a certain character. I do agree that Ned is basically the only, a large reason to the downfall of House Stark, which Littlefinger actually talks about him like wearing his honor like armor and how it's going to cause him to sink.
Yeah.
Oh, here it is. You wear your suit of honor like a suit of armor, Stark. You think it keeps you safe, but all it does is weigh you down and make it hard for you to move. And what makes me so mad about Ned is that he's sitting there saying to Renly, like, Joffrey's not the one true king, and I can't do that. That's not honorable. But he and Robert actively rebelled against the king. Like, they were part of a rebellion. Like, I don't understand why he's so, like, butthurt about, going against what he thinks is, or what is right, because he's not the one true king. It's like, well, Robert wasn't the one true king, but he seized the throne, and now he is.
Yeah, because technically Ned helped to kill Rhaegar, and Rhaegar is the actual true king. He should have been king.
It literally makes no sense to me whatsoever. I just don't think he was honorable as he says he is, or that most people think that he is.
That's something that I didn't think about, but that is a very good point.
Yeah.
Like, why could he sort of put aside his sense of honor then, but when it's actually his own personal life and the life of the people he loves the most, why couldn't he set it aside for the safety of his own family and his house?
So blind.
So Rachel, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, so I know that you're saying that he couldn't put his honour aside, but in the end, his final character arc was him putting his honour aside, his head on the chopping block in front of everybody, and going against what he knew was right for him within his moral compass, which was to tell the truth and everything that he's found out within the book and the family tree and the seed is strong. And he put that all on the line to protect his family, even though that goes against his massive moral code. And that was then you've got Joffrey sat there and he's just like, I'm just going to take his head anyway. And this is like, I have like a serious fucking problem with that, because and I need to talk about Joffrey later, but that's just, he did put himself on the line there and he did go against his moral code and it ended up with his death. So maybe that wasn't the right thing to do.
I think a lot of things about Ned as well seems to be he does too little too late. Like, he had an opportunity where he said he wasn't going to be the Hand of the King anymore and he was going to return to Winterfell. And if he had returned at that point or sent Sansa and Arya back at that point, then at least Sansa would have been safe and Arya wouldn't be like roaming around whatever the hell she's doing. So, like, he had that opportunity then to get out and he didn't take it, even though he's known from the beginning when he accepted the position that Robert is not the man that is his best friend. Robert has changed and he's not the person that Ned loved and Ned knew. And that opportunity was a perfect time for him to leave. Just like the two things that I gave in evidence of my like feelings about Ned were the perfect opportunity for him to then put aside his honor. but he put aside his honor at the very last second, like when it came to the point that he would literally die at that second unless he said that he committed treason. And as like dealing with Joffrey, and he knows Joffrey and that he's unreasonable, so I feel like it would have been just much better if he'd have done that earlier.
Yeah.
I feel like he's just not. He couldn't assimilate to the culture of King's Landing, and that, you know, I agree with everyone. It was his downfall, but I feel like there's a slight thing where he sided with Robert against the Mad King, but then we need to kind of remember, why is the Mad King called the Mad King? Like, his father and his brother, I'm pretty sure, were both murdered by this king. So there's already this kind of vendetta. He already has this hatred for this person who's ruling. And then I think his assumption of what happened to Lyanna, because that's what we have assumptions. I think that was like the last straw. Like, he's already lost so much family because of the people who are ruling. Yet he doesn't use his bias against those people to like control how he views Daenerys, for example. So I feel like definitely he does kind of, his honor is his downfall. He doesn't know how to use it correctly. His honesty is his downfall. But I think his reasoning for, you know, like not being able to alter himself or like not being able to change kind of makes sense, considering, you know, where he's from. And like what he came from. It's going to be really hard for him to change that, and he didn't want this position in the first place, so like, I don't know.
True.
Which we'll get into later about a certain character.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I agree with Becca. It's very much too little too late, and in the end his downfall ended up kind of being defending Cat and saying Cat did this on my orders, and also, you know, saying that thing with Sansa at the end, like he had to tell the truth or it'd be Sansa's head as well. But I feel like Cat has a lot to do with that, because like you said, he didn't want to be the Hand, and it was Cat that convinced him to be the Hand so he could investigate Jon Arryn's murder. And then Cat convinces him to trust Littlefinger, and Littlefinger's definitely a downfall of just the whole thing. So I don't think it's just Ned on his own, but definitely like too honourable, like to what's the word? detriment, definitely.
Yeah. I feel like
easily.
Catelyn making him take the position of a Hand, like her motives just made no sense to me. And then things got a little bit worse. And then she was like, oh, you definitely need to take it now. And I was like, well, no, actually, you should back off. Like, I definitely would not take it now. But I think Ashley really wants to rant about Catelyn. So now is the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say off that. Let me find my notes. Okay, so she is one of the main reasons why Ned decides to go and take the position of the Hand King, because she does convince him, because she wants him to investigate Jon Arryn's murder, which, you know, not too terrible of a decision. But really where she fucks it up, in my opinion, is when she chooses Tyrion Lannister. Like, I was just going through that scene again, and literally there is no indication that there is a threat, except that he's been told that the Lannisters are the reason for Bran's attempted murder. He doesn't even really know if it's Tyrion. And literally it's like, hi, look, Catelyn Stark, weird to meet you here. And then she's like, all right, we're taking you prisoner. And it's like, wait, what?
Poor Tyrion as well.
Yeah, why couldn't you made up something like, oh, well, I just wanted to visit my husband and now I'm going back. Like, peace out. I don't understand why she had to take him. I just don't understand her decision to do that.
And then she just let him go.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cody. You could.
That's okay. Do you guys remember the dagger, though? The dagger that she found?
Littlefinger
told her that it was Tyrion's,
That's right.
And he'd lost it in a bet, so that she already thought it was going to be Tyrion. But then Tyrion's like, well, why would I use my own dagger? That's just stupid. And she's kind of like thinking, oh, yeah, you're not guilty, but I just hate you anyway. Like,
yeah. The thing with Littlefinger as well, like, what does Littlefinger have to gain from that? He could have said that he knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
Like, what was his stance on that?
He wanted a clash. Like, I swear, Varys and Littlefinger and everyone behind the scenes just want war. Varys just loves the drama.
Oh yeah.
Faris totally loves the drama. I think it would be strange to try and get into the mind of Lord Baelish right now, because we know so little of him at this point within the books, and I'm hoping that we get his perspective in the later books. It would be fantastic to be in his mind for some of the chapters. I don't know if we're given that opportunity, because I think Ash just is twisted and trying to figure out why he did something right now. It's just, I think it's beyond us.
I think even like at the point where the show is up to, like, I still don't have a clue why he got involved and what his end game was, really, because he changed so many times along the way.
Yeah.
So like he's just a mystery all around.
While we're talking about Lord Baelish, there was one point in this where I think they were having some kind of tournament, and he looked at Sansa and he's like, "You have the Tully look." And he was looking at her and he was just like, he saw immediately that she was Catelyn's daughter. And I was just like, okay, there's some kind of strange fascination going on there, because we know of like the games that Catelyn used to play with her and her sister with him that she mentioned, like this kissing game. And of course he's got this, adoration with Cat. And then he sees Sansa, and you could just see it right there that he's, I don't know, he connected with her in that moment for me.
Yeah, he's a very creepy dude.
Definitely. I feel like Catelyn's biggest downfall is her strong maternal instinct, and she just wants to protect so much. She tries to embody the Tully words, but just like Ned, she's so stuck in her ways. And the real difference is Catelyn is so impulsive. I feel like her main thing was like, just because she has this favoritism towards Bran, let's be honest. Like, it was so clear even before Bran's accident. She goes on to this whole passage about how much she's going to miss him, but then it's like she's given this indication that, oh, it could be the Lannisters. Okay, cool, right? But she just rushes with it, and I feel like someone who's a leader, someone who is essentially kind of like a queen, but essentially first lady, to be so impulsive is so stupid. Like, you wouldn't expect that kind of, action from a leader. You would expect more, cohesiveness, more logic, and she just completely lacks that. And I just, oh my god, man, she's just so frustrating. It's making me angry.
I think Ned's faith in her is strange as well. Sorry, Rachel. I was just saying, I think that the reason that Ned, like, or the way that Ned is so, like, trusting of her, and she's just ruining everything. Like, she starts the main conflict when she takes Tyrion hostage, and it's like, Ned, you have left this woman in charge. Like, you left her in charge of Winterfell. Like, why? You must have known that she had this capability about her, especially how torn up she was after, like, Bran's accident. And then he also defends her as well after that, and it's insanity.
She didn't even keep hold of Tyrion when she had him. I can understand potentially her, grabbing hold of him and being like, okay, this is my collateral. He's killed, nearly tried to kill my, son. And then she just takes him to the Eyrie, and it just completely gets out of her hand. And then there's the fight, and it's just, the whole thing was just a shit show. And then she loses him, and he just like wanders to, his father's camp, and he's just like, I'm here, father.
With his clansmen.
With his clansmen, which I absolutely loved. I thought they were hilarious. But you've definitely like hit on something really important now, which is talking about, why did Ned value her opinion so much when I see her as like a Sansa in a way, but only like 10 years older. I don't see her as being the mother of this massive clan. And like, her behavior is really bizarre, especially when someone's so moral and so so strong as Ned Stark, a person like really, really cared for her and really trusted her. Her behavior didn't match up in that respect.
Especially as, like, we've discussed about the sexism in this, like, this is a world very much where you can keep your wife in check. So, like, he doesn't have to put up with her doing this, and he allows it. And it's just such a like strange thing for him to do.
Yeah, I think that.
Sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
After taking Tyrion, and when she finally reconnects with Robb, I think she does, in a way, for me, redeem herself just a little bit, because she does take the initiative, and she does help him make certain political and military moves. But there is a decision that she makes in the later books that we will discuss that royally fucks with Stark. Like, again, due to her impulsiveness and her maternal instinct, she gets these like blinders on where she just sees like, I need to keep my family safe. But kind of like with Ned, she's not really able to see the larger picture. She only sees like my family, but it's like, you know, that decision's going to affect this, which is going to affect that, which is then going to affect your family even more. She just hasn't been able to foresee the consequences of her actions, which is extremely frustrating. And not to mention the fact that we were talking about her being very maternal and her favoritism towards Bran. Well, what about her hatred of Jon and her treatment? And like, that's one of the things that I really like about the show. I felt like they downplayed that a lot more than they did in the books. It's a lot worse in the books. Just the way that she treats this child, just because of the act of the father, you know, just solidified my hatred for her.
I think it would be especially difficult for her knowing who Ned is and knowing how honourable he is as a partner, and then there's something that he is hiding from her, and why, and it's the one thing that she didn't know about him, because otherwise he was completely honest. And I think that that's really where she was just like, okay, he must have loved this woman so much if he's never wanting to bring him up again. And the one conversation they had, he was asking her, where did you hear this information? And he was just like, I never want you to mention that name again. And that was it. That was the end of their conversation. So it's the one secret that he kept from her. And I think that she holds that really closely. Whereas I was going to mention spoilers there. I'm going to stop. Yeah.
I feel like one thing that really, really used to frustrate me in my first rereads was that why didn't Ned just tell her, like, like he should be transparent with his partner, But then I thought about it. Catelyn Tully's biggest downfall is her maternal instinct. If it ever came down to a situation where she felt like her kids were in jeopardy, her children, I don't feel like she would have it in her to protect Jon.
I agree.
She knew any of these things.
Yeah, no, she wouldn't.
And Ned, knowing it was like,
yeah,
he's going to protect that. He's going to take that to the grave. So I just feel like taking that into account is definitely, I feel like that affected my reading this time around. And saying that Catelyn is like Sansa, like, definitely I feel like Catelyn is everything that is meant to be embodied by a Westerosi woman. Like, she's she does her job, she's so maternal, she cares about her kids, and that's all she cares about. And Sansa plays her role so perfectly. She is everything she's expected to be. But if she continued down this road, she'd kind of end up like Catelyn, but not with Joffrey. And that isn't someone that she should be, because Catelyn is not a strong woman. Personally, I find that she's not a strong woman because she gives into impulses so quickly. She's not strong-willed. She doesn't have a strong mind, simply because she's so ready to be subservient to whatever she feels like she has to do at the time.
I was wondering where you'd gone, but everybody was in a flow, so I was like, let's just hope Cody can get back in.
So sorry, just a quick input on Cat, like from my point of view. So the key word I would associate with Cat is naive. And the first chapter for Cat, where we're introduced to her, it basically goes on about her upbringing in Riverrun. Is it Riverrun?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it describes the places like airy and bright, and birds are singing, and it's just this complete difference to Winterfell and everywhere else basically within the world. And that kind of is symbolic of her naive ways. And that's how I see that. So just a little something for you to think about.
I get that.
Does anybody have anything else to say about Catelyn?
She's a bitch.
Yeah, there is that.
I do have, well, not necessarily pertaining to Catelyn, but I do think that the fact that George R.R. Martin, which we'll discuss like in the way that he foreshadows. Like Trump, I feel like he's heavy-handed, but then again, he's very not heavy-handed. But I feel like he does put a lot of emphasis on the fact that certain Starks are actually not Stark. They're more like Tully. And I feel like that plays a lot into those specific characters' narratives, which I find very, very interesting.
Yeah, like how Rob acts, like Rob the King is more like Ned, but Rob's actual personality embodies Tully's more. Ricky can't really say a comment, he's just a child. And Sansa very, very, very Tully. Meanwhile, Arya, she has, what was
Stark.
the blood of the wolf, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And Lyanna had a touch of it, and you look so much like Lyanna. And like, I just want to quickly talk about that scene because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
When like with Needle. Oh my god, my heart. Like,
yeah, and John's always very, even though they say like he's not a Stark, but he has a lot of very Stark-like attributes. Even though he's a bastard, and then you see that with his actions in the Night's Watch, especially in the later books.
Okay, so I think Cody had something to say about Littlefinger.
I think a lot of it has been said, hasn't it? He's complex. I feel like we're all wanting to find out a bit more about him from the first book, but again, it's trying to figure out what his motivation in all of this is. Is it just that love for Cat and that revenge that he wants on the Starks because Ned's older brother kind of humiliated him, right, at the beginning of the book, years ago, and now he hates Ned as well. And also the creepiness with Sansa, because if he can't have Cat, maybe he can have Sansa, who's, so much like her and looks so much like her. So is that his main motivation, though? Is it that? Because we know he kind of trains halls at a whorehouse, and he just really got like this kind of like over-sexualized brain? Or is it just him being cunning and wanting to keep being the master of coin? It's difficult as well to kind of figure out who his alliances are with. He's always very self-serving, but he can change, can't he, depending on how the tide goes and who's next in power. Is that person going to say, be a good fit for him? And also, kind of at the end, he doesn't go for Renly, right? Because Renly wouldn't have him in a place of power, but he's safe with Joffrey, even though he knows Joffrey is not good for the kingdom. Whereas Varys is kind of that opposite and maybe doesn't want Joffrey to be in power. So it's kind of like you never really know where you stand with Lord Baelish. So yeah, I think he's super interesting. I also love as well that throughout the whole of the book, he tells Ned not to trust him like numerous times. And then he's like, told you not to trust me. Come on, Ned.
I feel like, go ahead, Ashley.
I think we're probably going to say the same thing, in that I do feel like maybe the spurning of Catelyn Stark and the fight with Brendan was kind of like the spark to everything. I do think that probably from a very young age, he was very manipulative and very power hungry. And the fact that he kind of came from this place that pretty much no one knows, like the Fingers, like no one knows anything. There's nothing in the Fingers. There's no ability to move up and to grab and seize power. And I think that he even mentions that he was a very small child as well. And I'm assuming he probably was like picked on, and the fact that he didn't really have any royal blood or anything like that. He was essentially nothing. Like, he was just kind of a friend of the Tully family, and they looked down upon him. And I think that kind of really began everything. And I kind of feel like this whole scheme is because of Catelyn to an extent, kind of exact revenge, or maybe it's just a byproduct that he saw a chance, like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of angry 30 years later. Like, let me just take her out while I can. Maybe. I don't know.
No, I definitely feel what you're saying, and I feel like that plays into the similarity yet difference of Lord Baelish and Varys. I feel like they're both like two sides of the same coin, so I really like that comparison, in the sense that I feel like Lord Baelish's endgame is more so he wants to be the one in power, he wants to be the one that brings about change. Meanwhile, like Varys, he's thinking about the bigger picture, and he wants to be the one to help the right person be in power. And like, one is very insular, one is very outward thinking, and that's why Varys is, there's hints of it put throughout the book that he is conscious of everything. He has awareness of everything in a way that Littlefinger, none of the Lannisters, or anyone else really will have.
Yeah, it's interesting how Varys is also in talks with, is it Illyrio as well, the merchant who Daenerys first
Yeah.
stayed with? And like, you know, he's getting stuff from Illyrio and Illyrio sends it back to Varys. So he is the one that's kind of getting this news, not also just from Jorah as well, but also through Illyrio, who Dany obviously assumes is on their side, but you know, maybe his motivations aren't. So they have this whole conversation that Arya overhears, right? Talking about maybe it's best to get Ned out of the way so we can save some time for an upcoming war. Like, is the war that they want to be a Targaryen versus Lannister war? You know what I mean? Maybe not so much the King of the North, etc.
It's something interesting. Sorry. That you kind of said there about Jorah Mormont, because it's not something that I recognised when I was watching the television series, but the fact that he was connected to the Mormonts that was on the Night's Watch, and the guy that was on the Night's Watch, was it his son?
Yeah,
and Jorah Mormont is his son, and Jorah Mormont is with Daenerys Targaryen. And like, literally, it blew my mind reading that, because when you're watching the TV series, it just doesn't, the characters don't connect. I don't, especially if you're watching it the first time or the second. Even like, I've watched it 3 times now, and still I was shocked by some things. I was like, oh my god! And then Master Aemon, was it Master? Yes,
Aemon.
Master Aemon, when he said that he was actually a bloody Targaryen, and I was like, oh my god! And you're just again.
See, I remember seeing that in the show, but I also remember being really confused because the show is so condensed. Like, there's a lot of things that don't mean as much, or you don't immediately realize, like you do when you read the book.
And definitely, like, the not the relationship, but like Jon and Daenerys' stories actually mimic each other a lot. Like, there are similar players around them in both, and it's like, for example, you know, you've got a Mormont with both of them. You've got another Targaryen with both of them. The way they go through difficulty and have to like seize the opportunity and the position they're in is very, very similar. So I feel like I don't want to say that Martin's creativity is limited in this essence. I feel like it's very much done purposefully to like show these two characters, like character arcs and everything, being so similar yet in such different dispositions. And I feel like it shows how intelligent Martin is as a writer, especially for how things progress in later books. And then obviously if you want to take it into the TV show, then you can take it that way. But yeah, that's all I had to say.
I think it's also very interesting as well that the reason that Jorah Mormont can't come back to Westeros is because Ned won't allow that to happen. Like, Robert's just okay with like kind of being like, he can come back, he's given us some information about Dany being pregnant, etc. We should give him a pardon and let him come back. And Ned's like, no. But can you imagine if Ned had said yes? Like, Jorah wouldn't have been there to stop her from being poisoned by the wine. So Ned has his way, even he's playing his, you know, pulling strings and whatnot, even in where Daenerys is. So I thought that was pretty cool as well that they added in there.
Okay, so I think Ryan wanted to talk about Jon, but especially Jon's relationship with Tyrion.
Right, so I guess we'll just start talking about Jon for now. Because like the 2 separate characters that deserve to be spoken about separately.
Okay.
Of course. Yeah. Sorry, my internet connection's dropping.
Oh no.
Can you see me?
Well, you're still here. We can see you. We can hear
fine.
you.
Oh, right. Yeah, so Jon. So a lot of people seem to have an opinion on Jon that he's just like this sweet but boring character. And to an extent, I kind of agree.
I disagree.
Oh, no.
However, like, he's just so honourable.
You're wrong.
So kind. Oh god, I've got haters.
You know nothing.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Yeah, he's so honourable. He's so kind in the way he is with Samwell, and the way he gets everyone in that chapter to basically help him. And he has like leadership qualities. There's so much about him which is good, but then I'm just a bit like, you're a bit boring.
See, I first read the book, that's exactly how I felt about Jon. I was like I kind of like him and I should love him because everyone loved him so much. But I was like, he's kind of really boring. And then upon reread, like everything just changed. Everything started to make more sense, and I was just like, I get it now. Like he's my precious baby, and no one better ever hurt him because
John is like definitely way more like Eddard than any of Eddard's sons are.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why his character arc is so interesting, because you see him having the same kind of similar moral compass as Ned, and having the same biases and whatnot. But he becomes more and more empathetic. That's his main problem. He doesn't have that empathy. And he lets his childishness and his privilege actually get in the way and lead to condescension.
That is something which I found so annoying.
Yeah,
Like when he gets to the Night's Watch and he's like, I'm better than everybody. And I'm like, come on, just...
I have a quote for this, and sorry, it's something that I absolutely loved. Definitely when you mentioned there about like the class and his privilege, and it's when I forgot, the Master of the Night's Watch was talking to him, and he said, now think on this, boy. None of these others have had a master at arms until Sir Alistair. Their fathers were farmers and wagon men and poachers, smiths and miners and oars on a trading galley. What they know of fighting, they learnt between decks, in the alleys of Old Town and Lannisport, in wayside brothels and taverns on King's Road. They may have clacked a few sticks together before they came here, but I promise you, not 1 in 20 was ever as rich enough to own a real sword. His look was grim. So how do you like the taste of your victories now, Lord Snow? And it's like, it's such an important lesson for him to have learned, because he's just like, hey, I've come here and they're all picking on me and they're calling me things and I'm just going to be so condescending to them. But then it's like, it's a real blunt lesson for him that actually you do come from a place of privilege and you have had a lot and you are on a different level from these people, and you need to recognize that.
And we do show that he learns from that as well, because that is obviously the chapter where he then takes these people on board and improves with them and gets them to help Samwell, and you see that growth come from that event.
Exactly, that humbling leads to the empathy that Ned has. Like that, you know, when I think Arya was talking about how there would always be someone new sitting with them at the dining table.
Yeah,
I definitely feel like that plays into the idea that John is like Ed later on, simply because he starts to just be more empathetic, be more understanding, and just like put his, as someone had quoted earlier, he kind of puts his honesty and his honor on like armor, and it affects things. But that's it. Okay.
I think John's privilege was definitely a hard thing for him to learn, because if you think of his life with the Starks, he's definitely at the bottom of the pile. So for him to go somewhere and realize how privileged he actually is, when he kind of thought that he was the more disadvantaged person, because he hasn't known life as a peasant. So he has this like whole woe is me thing because Catelyn hates him. But then for him to go somewhere and realize how privileged he actually is, but he gets checked constantly. Like I definitely remember that Benjen checked him. But he has that before, where people are like, you can't just come in here and be a ranger. That's not how it's going to work. Like, you have to earn it, and you're not going to be treated better than anybody else.
Yeah.
I do kind of agree with what Ryan said about him being boring, because when I was reading the book, I was kind of remembering like the characters from the show, and I think the characterizations of the actors is really good based on the actual text of the book. But I was trying to compare John to the John in the show, and I thought, oh, well, I can't remember John in the show being this petulant and this boring. And then I remember, like, John, I don't remember John from season 1 at all. I feel like he only comes, like, into his own and his character much later on, to where he's not just another character. He's, like, somebody to actually pay attention to.
I definitely feel like the first book in general just shows the petulance of a lot of these characters, apart from Dany. Like for perspective characters when they're children, like Arya, you know, doesn't want to like actually think logically or anything like that. Sansa doesn't want to think logically or anything like that at all. You know, Jon has, like, all these Stark children have the same issues, even Bran, but they have this awakening, and it's kind of part of their arc to basically grow up and stop thinking just from what they want to what's actually, you know, this is what the real world's like, and you if you want to change it, then you need to think beyond yourself.
Which that kind of like goes into something that I wanted to discuss with foreshadowing. I don't know if anyone else picked up on that. I feel like it's pretty heavy-handed, but there's a lot of emphasis throughout the whole book on seeing, and especially with Sirio during his lessons with Arya. He's always talking about like, what do you see? Like, what do you see? And something during, let me go back to John.
When Arya was running through the streets and she was like constantly going over the lessons that Syria had taught her. Yeah.
So when we first meet John, it's actually, I don't know if it's in his chapter or Ned's chapter or Bran, but Bran says, talking about John, but there was little he did not see. And then there's also another thought where he says, so Bran thought it curious that this pup alone would have opened his eyes while the others were still blind, and referring to ghosts. And we all know that the direwolves are always compared and almost synonymous with their owners. So I thought that was kind of interesting when he was
I didn't pick up on that, but that's really good. Yeah, that's a good point.
I actually, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know who said this, but it says the true seeing, that is the heart of it. And I think that's a lot of the basis of most of the character arcs of the Starks, especially with like Sansa. You know, in the very beginning, Sansa is very blinded, and then towards the end, we start to realize that she's starting to actually see things for the way that they truly are, and that's really where her character arc starts to take off. And even with John's case as well, you know, he sees his life as, you know, traumatic because he's a bastard and he's never going to be able to live up to anyone's expectations because of that. And then he goes to the Night's Watch and it's like, oh shit, like, I had it a lot better than most of all these people, and he gets checked a lot. I really liked it when Sam checked him when he found out he was going to be a steward to Mormont, and Sam's like, they're trying to groom you for command, dude. And he's like, oh, right. And that's what I love so much about John, is that at the moment he gets checked, he actually like takes the moment and is like, wow, you're right. Like, I need to change that. And that's pretty much exactly what he said when Sam was talking to him. He's like, wow, I was really actually acting the boy. I'm really sorry. I'm like, that's my boy.
It's like he needs someone on his shoulder to basically be like, hey, are you dumb? Are you dumb?
Yeah.
Are you dumb? Are you dumb? Are you dumb? Like this one. Like you actually made a really interesting point about the names of the direwolves correlating to the people, and I actually did make a bit of a note on that. So like should we talk about that maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So John's is Ghost, Bran, Summer, Sansa Lady, Arya Nymeria, Rob Greywind, and Rickon Shaggy Dog. So Ghost is definitely, I feel like it's kind of like John is like a ghost of the past, kind of. It kind of has that feeling. He is isolated. He's like this reminder for Catelyn of, you know, this woman who doesn't exist. Meanwhile, he's a different kind of a reminder for Ned, and I feel like that's kind of how I interpreted his name.
Ooh.
You could also say that it's because like a lot of his family don't consider that he exists. Like, he's not a Stark.
Yeah,
So he's like the ghost of the Stark family.
Yeah, exactly, defo for sure. And then Bran Summer.
Haunts Ned Stark. That he's the ghost that haunts Ned Stark, like that decision that he made in the past to like hide it.
Promise me, Ned. Promise me. But yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I had a thought about like Ned's death at the end. He is the only person who knows the truth. So like that dies with Ned. Nobody else knows anything until like you have like visions and all sorts like that. But the actual living person who knows what happened. So any sort of talk of Lyanna like that is now gone because so's Ned.
And then there's Bran with Summer, and I feel like Bran's is the only name that feels not only reminiscent of the past but of the future, considering winter is coming.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Rachel.
I picked on something with Summer. So it basically said that Bran was 7 years old, but Summer has lasted 9 years. So he has only known Summer. But yet, with the Three-Eyed Raven, he was having the visions of winter. And obviously the winter is coming, and the past winter as well. But for him, maybe it's him clinging on to Summer and clinging onto that for himself. Because he only named Summer after he woke up, after he'd had the visions of the winter to come and the winter before.
Mhm.
I feel like it is mentioned many, many times. Like Braddy's constantly reminded that he was a summer baby and that
Yeah.
he's never known anything but summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And it kind of also goes into this idea that later on, very quickly, I'm gonna try and not spoil with this, but it gives this idea that Bran as Bran only exists in the summer. And that's all I'm gonna say. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I feel like Sansa's name is pretty blunt. Lady.
Bless her.
I
That's
don't-
all she wants to be.
Bland name for a bland character.
Oh,
True though.
can that
Hater.
be any more scolding?
But I do feel like Lady being the first direwolf to die and
Important.
is
Very
so cool. And it's the awakening of Sansa and like the realization, this fallacy that she's created in her mind of like Joffrey and becoming a queen and whatnot. There is a dark side to it. She saw the dark side of Joffrey before that happened, and that really plays into the subconscious elements of how she proceeds forward and the fear she has while she's in the castle. At least that's how I
No,
perceive
it's interesting. Yeah.
What I saw with the direwolves is, of course, Nymeria has run off and is, kind of like a tearaway and a stray, just like Arya is becoming, like towards the end of the book, and she runs away from the palace and she's going to be this lone wolf. And that's one of like the major prophecies that it's not really a prophecy because Ned Stark says it to Arya in his like last meeting with her, and he says it's really poignant, something like when the lone wolf dies and the white winds blow or something. I need to find it, but it's a really pivotal phrase.
It's the lone wolf dies and the pack survives.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm wondering who the lone wolf is, but I think it was really interesting for Nymeria because like she just runs off, and that's quite sympathetic to Arya's struggle there. I can't remember what happens with Ghost or the others though.
I was gonna just touch on that real quick.
Yeah,
that is heavy foreshadowing of what happens, because when you think about the other Stark children, without saying any names, the lone wolf dies and the pack survives is very apt for when you think about.
Oh my god, I get it.
You understand what I mean? Okay, yeah. Right, so next direwolf, Robb's Greywind. I feel like it's pretty blunt, like his character.
I love
Grey
Robb.
Wind.
Rob's my favourite.
That's a talking point, man. I feel like Robb really got the shaft. Like, you understand in later books, like, I just want his POV so bad because you only get to see it through the lens of basically only Catelyn Stark. And I just feel like he didn't deserve that. He deserves so much more.
I haven't read I've only read the first book so far, but I'm gonna go ahead and predict that Robb's characterization is a lot better in the show than the books, because I flicked through the next few books and I definitely noticed who's missing in the perspectives list, and it's really upsetting because Robb is my favorite character.
Oh.
Yeah.
Robb is just so nuanced, but I feel like his downfall was the blah 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 blah. Let me shut up. Okay. Someone made a very interesting point about Nymeria. Who brought up Nymeria?
Rachel?
Okay, like what you actually said about Nymeria, I feel like it's quite similar to Arya's arc, especially after this book.
Yes.
In the sense not only of, lone wolf, but also kind of the aspect of Nymeria's story of like the actual person. But I'm gonna leave that for, maybe we should discuss that at the end, considering
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, because I feel like that's definitely more so on the spoiler section.
Yeah,
spoiler section. And I don't want to ruin this book.
But I'm with you on that. I wrote it down as well.
Yeah. And finally, it's just Rickon with Shaggy Dog, and I feel like Rickon is just so pure. He's clumsy. He's a little ditzy one, and it's emulated in Shaggy Dog. And it's like he doesn't. I don't know. I feel like he's so his dog is characterized by its childishness and its roughness, which sits so heavily where his story lies as well. So kind of like Nymeria, it's something that's heavily foreshadowing what happens to these characters, but I don't feel like I have anything more to say about the names other than that.
Yeah.
I agree with pretty much everything you said.
Can we talk about Sansa? Because I know that like some of us really hate on her. But
Yeah, take it away with the Sansa.
I mean, for me, I just feel like I really didn't like her with the TV show. I didn't connect with her. I didn't understand her at all. And she really, really irritated me. But when I was reading it from her perspective in the books, I really connected and understood. I really connected and yeah, understood. What was the word? I really connected and understood her just for her childishness and for her naivety and the way that she looks at her beautiful Prince Joffrey and thinks that he is the greatest thing to shine on earth. And even though he does some like questionable things with her sister, and then when they're by the river and he then attacks her friend ends up being killed, which isn't something that I remember happening in the TV show. I don't. Micah didn't die in the TV show, did he?
No, he did.
He did.
He did.
Yeah, he did.
Oh, I thought he showed up later. Okay, I have to rewatch again. But then, chapter by chapter, she's introduced to more of his behaviour, and then at the end, she's like, "Okay, they need me to say yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, if it please you," and she was just like, "Shit, I don't know what's going on here now. I'm going to have to relinquish all control." And it's really going to be interesting to see her arc throughout the entire series and see how she becomes the person that she does. Because I found her character growth, even just within this book, as really powerful. Whether you like her or you don't, I do feel that she was a different person from beginning to end. And she's got a much larger story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agree.
I feel like I disliked her more reading from her perspective, because there are points where she sees what Joffrey's sees the reality of the situation, and she then chooses to ignore it. Whereas that's worse than her being naive and not understanding like what's going on and thinking that she's going to live in this perfect fairy tale. But like she sees the reality when she sees what happens with Arya, and she chooses Joffrey over Arya. And I think I don't know where that fits into anything, because she's neither like Catelyn nor like Ned, and there's just no loyalty to her family there at all. Like she chooses to do what she wants, even though she knows, like she's seen with her own eyes, that it's not true, over protecting anybody in her family. And I think it's fitting that Lady dies, because she's like just betraying all of her family in that situation, and she does the wrong thing. But then even that doesn't teach her a lesson.
I actually see a lot of parallels between Sansa and Cersei.
I was just going to say it.
I was just going to say that too.
And it's, I hate to say it because we have watched the show, but it's something that I definitely saw within the show. Not her behaviour per se, but just the character that she is and the person that she is. And then having read this now, I can see how she might become someone that Cersei would be in the future. Like for sure.
Agreed.
I feel like with Sansa, she is so stuck in, like, she is like Cersei, definitely in what you said, because I didn't actually think about that until you said it. She was stuck in this fallacy that she was going to be, a lady of the Stark house, and then she was going to be, married to some great, lord or whatnot, who led another house. And then she was given this idea that she's going to be the future queen one day, And I feel like she was so stuck within this illusion. She was everything she had to be. Like, she acted in the feminine manners she was meant to be. So when put in this situation where she has to like accept that her dreams aren't real, I think that's what goes into like her not being able to accept it. Like, she's having such a hard time accepting it. And it's like, even after everything that happens with Ned, she still is trying to be who she has to be, like she's subservient, she's submissive, because she doesn't know what else to be. She doesn't really think she has the ability to have a voice. And I feel like in that element, Arya obviously has this jealousy towards Sansa, wherein like Sansa is superior to her in certain ways, even though Arya wants to, be able to fight and whatnot. It's made very explicit that Arya is envious she doesn't get to wear the things or like do things as well as Sansa. But I feel like Sansa's also jealous of Arya in a sense that she doesn't get to rebel. She doesn't have that within her. And she knows it isn't expected of her. And she's so stuck in playing this role that she doesn't know how to play out of it.
Yeah, I find that she's just very, very in awe of Cersei. I feel like she sees Cersei as this beautiful woman who has everything that she wants. And there's even parts in this book, even after Cersei has given the order to kill Lady, she still wants Cersei's approval. She still wants her mother-in-law, her future mother-in-law, to like her and maybe be a new mum because Kat's not there, right? And also, I love her character growth by the end of this. Like, she's just head over heels with Joffrey, just full on says she loves him. And then it gets to the end and Ned is gone. And I think Joffrey says something to her like, "You're lucky I didn't torture him before I killed him." And she says something like, "Well, Rob might kill you then." And he has someone hit her like twice. And it's just like, wow. Like, things are just going to completely change from now on. So it'll be exciting to see how that goes in the second book, even though I kind of already know what's going to happen. You know,
talking about kind of how Sansa is with her mum and like how she is with Catelyn. She doesn't bring her up very often, and she doesn't like her sister. And so I'm wondering whether we can kind of explore, is George R.R. Martin good at recognizing female to female relationships, like sister to sister, daughter to mother, and even two female friends? Because it's not something that I've recognized so far as being like either written well or even acknowledged.
Yeah, like even Lysa and Kat as well. They're like, don't really have that sisterly vibe, right? And
No, not at all.
Like an exaggerated version of what Catelyn could be if she was in her grief that much kind of deal.
I don't think I even remember a scene where Sansa or Arya spoke to Catelyn or she to them. I don't think they're even in the same room together for like the entirety of the first book. And I'm wondering if that's like, I'm kind of reading into it a little bit too much because I don't think there's anything that I've seen from the show or anything that evidences this, but maybe is Sansa trying to get so close to Cersei because, as we've just discussed, Sansa is like neither of her parents. So has she had like maybe a stilted relationship with her mother and identifies more with Cersei than she ever has her own mother? Maybe.
Potentially, because we definitely saw Arya connecting with her father, but we didn't see her connecting with her mother. And it might be the same with Sansa, that she couldn't connect with her father because of her ambition and what she wanted to do and where she wanted to go, and she wanted to be a lady. But we didn't see any connection with her with Kat. So it could be that she's grabbing hold of Cersei in that respect to try to get a replacement mother.
It just makes it just makes me wonder where Sansa has this ambition from to become like this high lady, really prim and proper, if it's not been taught to her by anybody around her, really. Because Catelyn's not at all like the person that Sansa wants to be. Like, she is a high lady, but she's not like in...
I feel like she mothers her in the way that Catelyn doesn't, because there's a lot of scenes where she's like doing needlework or, you know, learning typical lady ways and sorry, lady ways. And yeah, you see a lot of like Septa Mordane doing that. You like, she's the replacement mother in a way.
I feel, yeah, and there's like this idea because the way Sansa speaks about Joffrey must be within Cersei's mind very reminiscent about how Cersei must have spoken about Rhaegar. And so she's like, Marcella doesn't seem to have that. Like, we don't see much of Marcella. We don't really see much of any other family other than Tyrion's perspective as a Lannister. But we can kind of glean from this little understanding that we do have that she's looking back on basically a past version of herself. And she feels this remorse because she knows what Joffrey's like. And she knows that Sansa's dreams and Sansa's fallacy is going to be just as hard for her to bear as it was for Cersei. And I feel like she's trying to make that burden easier with how she treats Sansa, but also she's a tool for her manipulation. So I feel like there's this juxtaposing and contrasting way she views Sansa, which aligns with how she treats her.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Zafina wanted to talk about Daenerys.
Oh boy.
I don't think I gave you enough time to prepare.
Oh god. Okay. My only thing, I was just so interested in everyone else's good discussions. Okay. So Daenerys, I feel like Daenerys' narrative is just so polar and so exoticized and isolated from the rest of the characters that it really plays into essentially our scope of the world and how we perceive the world. And it's definitely coming from a lens that is more so innocent and impressionable, but is the one lens that doesn't possess the same petulance as any of the other younger characters have, which I addressed before. Like John with his "oh, I'm the bastard, oh, Bran, like obviously being a cripple sucks, don't get me wrong, bro, I get it, but he's also comparing himself. Arya, she doesn't like not being Sansa, but also she wants to be more masculine, like stereotypically masculine, but not a possibility and whatnot. So Daenerys is the first character who doesn't have these issues. She is just trying to play the role she's in, right? She doesn't even know what she is. All she thought was like, hey, I'm gonna probably end up marrying my brother because that's what other people did, and that's about it. But the way she's perceptive and the way she's accepting different parts of the world really form this narrative that I feel kind of make her seem like they're trying to make her holier than thou. I feel like one of the problems with the entire book, and which kind of play into the entire series, and I like it, don't get me wrong, I love this series, but I do feel like Martin gave too many of the epic and good scenes to Dany. He gave her such a compelling and eventful narrative compared to other characters, and there's definitely a political landscape which she explores and she has to manipulate to her own advantage, don't get me wrong, but those affect the other characters a bit more and in more insular ways. When you compare to Dany, it's like she's just doing these crazy epic things, and it's just like, I don't know, I feel like it's quite damaging when we're trying to compare Daenerys' stories to other people's stories, and I don't feel like people get to see the nuances of people's stories when you've got this mega badass who rides dragons and she's the last true heir of some bloodline, and then you've got like, oh yeah, and then there's this person and she's just kind of like, oh yeah. And then you've got like, oh yeah, oh, she's going some crazy place and she's like learning to be a faceless man, but then oh yeah, you've got this guy who's like can't walk. I don't know. I just found that in the scope of things, it was damaging to the story. I adore her as a character, but I feel like she's been kind of over idolized in how Martin wrote her, and her faults always tend to be in the scope of things. Her faults tend to be her ignorance. It's not really her actually having a character flaw. And I don't like to use the term Mary Sue, because I feel like Mary Sue is more so like the term actually means when a character is like overpowered, but there's no reason as to why. But I would like to say that she has Mary Sue aspects in the fact that her issues aren't actual issues. They're not actual character flaws. They're just things she doesn't know. And I don't know. I just found that, I don't know. I don't want to say it's sexist, but I do feel like it made her character seem more simple. And you would expect it to be the most complex character, considering she goes through such a huge and eventful arc. But I don't know. How do you guys feel?
I find Daenerys interesting because for a great part of the book, and well, for the entirety of the book, she is completely separate to what is actually going on. And aside from them discussing what they're going to do with her, whether they're going to send an assassin after her, she's completely irrelevant to what's actually happening in the country that she is trying to, well, eventually will be trying to claim, because she's like the last dragon. And I feel like that's relevant to the series as a whole. For the entirety of it, she's not actually a part of the main storyline. Yeah, as you said, she does have a lot of the big like plot points, and like she has the dragons and she's like the rightful queen and all these things, and it's it's interesting how she's written, because you have characters who are actually more integral to the plot right now, that don't have as much going on as Dany does.
Mhm.
Which I think is a really good point, which is why I love the prologue of this book so much, is because we have this like very paranormal, like creepy, terrifying thing that happens, and then like it cuts to all this political stuff, and you're like, wait, what the hell's happening? Like,
Yeah.
and it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the book that there's this something lurking behind that no one is paying attention to, and we have no idea what's going on either, but we know that there's this threat, and it's just looming back there. And I feel like that's kind of how Dany is his way, maybe not as dramatic. It's just like, since it's not happening in Westeros right now, no one's paying attention to what's happening. So, and plus, I mean, when you look at Dany, I mean, she's the blood of the conquerors, you know, of Westeros. I mean, how could she not be badass, in my opinion? I mean, they had freaking dragons. But I don't know. I love her, but I do agree that it seems like Dany can do no harm in a way.
Mhm.
But
Especially because I find her to be incredibly presumptuous. Like, she's like, oh, Khal Drogo's dead, I'm going to take over the Dothraki now. And it's like, well, why? Like, who do you think you are?
I actually wrote this in my notes. I have some other things that kind of like foreshadow some things in later books.
Yeah.
I feel like she has a very white savior trope going on, and it kind of rubs me the wrong way, because she wants to go, which kind of mimics how, like, colonialism and things like that, how we felt that our, kind of like with Dany, that her way is the right way. So she goes into the cities that she knows nothing about. And it's like, you know what, I'm going to change the way that they've been doing things, even though it's not necessarily right, the way that they're doing those things. But why is he doing it? You know what I'm saying? I just don't.
I feel like that's definitely something to converse about when we get to later books, but I'm not trying to shush you, but I'm just saying, like, I agree, and I feel like we'll have great text examples, because I feel like with Dany, it definitely goes into the aspect that she's so ignorant about these things, and like when she gains that awareness, then she starts to have this acceptance and, you know, this understanding of this different kind of culture. What I was going to say was, you mentioned a great point about metaphors for foreshadowing, and I wanted to quickly just touch on the dragon dream. Oh, so good.
Which one?
Okay, it was like, okay, we have the first dragon dream wherein she sees, you know, a dragon, and she's kind of scared of it, whatnot, and she feels the dragon and it is kind of hot. But the second one, wherein, you know, we kind of remember she can't be damaged by fire, she likes her baths incredibly hot, and they don't hurt her, they make her feel pure and clean, right? Then in that dragon dream, we have a sequence wherein the dragon turns around and she's being scorched, she's being lit aflame, she's so warm. And beforehand, physically, she was, you know, dealing with sores. She wasn't enjoying her sex life. She felt very isolated and whatnot. But after that dream, after that purification within her dream, she becomes stronger physically. You know, she says, like, the blisters burst and whatnot. She starts enjoying riding. And when she cries out while she's in bed with Khal Drogo, it's not necessarily always in pain. And so we're starting to see this shift in her character, and dreams play such a huge aspect within the story, but especially Dany's story. And that definitely goes into, I think, what Point was saying about all this prophecy that's surrounding her, but there's also this subconscious prophecy within her dreams. And I feel like that instance, that purification she felt within her dream, changing her physical perception and mindset, heavily play into what happens in the end. You know, like, she goes into the funeral pyre, she is cleansed, she cleanses the world of this bitch witch, literally, and then you know, the dragons are reborn, she's reborn, she is now the dragon mother. And I feel like that might go into what you said, Becca, like that actually might have been what gave her the overconfidence, or the confidence to essentially think that people are going to follow her, because I think she had this subconscious awareness that she will wake up the dragons if she does this, because it's either this or nothing. But she believed it so strongly, and I feel like if she didn't have that resolve, then it wouldn't have been possible. And that's why Viserys couldn't do it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what I love so much is when Viserys gets mad at Dany, he's always like, do you want to wake the dragon? Do you want to wake the dragon? And like, literally, that's what she does. She wakes 3 dragons. Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a small question about this, because if he's a Targaryen and she's a Targaryen, why why is he not automatically able to wake dragons, and why does heat burn him and not her?
So I feel like that might be a biological issue, because obviously, like, there was some, like, essentially the Targaryen bloodline actually has a long history of madness, essentially. And some people said that it was because of, like, this is just like random trivia, but whatever. So some people said it was because of all the incest, and that argument can be used, and people do tend to use it against Jaime and Cersei for Joffrey, and they feel like Joffrey has a touch of the madness. Tommen doesn't have it, Marcella doesn't have it, but Joffrey has it. And it's this weird cruelty that the Mad King embodies in Viserys bodies, but Rhaegar and Daenerys don't have it. But it seems like everyone who apparently has this madness, they seem to have some kind of an ability to do things correctly. It's as if there's something biologically about them which not only enjoys this sadistic quality and sadistic way of life, but also affects their way to actually think properly, and maybe their ability to empathize. They might be psychopaths in a way, and I don't know, maybe that has a play into it. Or it could just be like, hey, if you're a good person, then the gods are watching, and they're like, but I don't know.
I don't know. I think it also plays into the fact, like in later books, like there is a prophecy that is involved, and I think that might also play into specifically Dany and not Viserys. Maybe not necessarily Targaryen, but yeah, that's in later.
Which prophecy do you think? The prince that was promised, or?
Yeah, the prince that was promised. Or
Yeah,
even
I had the same thought.
I'm beginning to think that the stallion that mounts the world and then also the prince's promise might actually be one and the same.
I feel like Dany does have a dream at some point, I'm pretty sure, about what her son would have been like and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I feel like
next book.
Yeah. And like I'm pretty sure the witch did say to her that her son would have been the stallion that mounts the world, and she didn't, and he would have raped and pillaged and stuff like that and continued this bullshit. So like I took that away, whatnot. And I think I don't want to like talk about the next books too much, because obviously, as you said, you know, we're going to talk about it, we're going to give examples, but I do just want to touch on the fact that like Dany's perception seems to be more all-seeing, and oh my god, I'm forgetting my point. Oh my god, someone say something before I get it back.
I want to talk about Joffrey in a little while, unless Safina figures out her point.
This happens to me all the time in live shows.
Yeah, if it comes up, then literally you can just shout in. But basically, Joffrey at the beginning, yes, he was an arse and he was a bit of a tit, and he did that thing by the river, which we didn't like. But he was so nice to Sansa, and he was like wooing her and like just telling her that she was so sweet and so beautiful, and he seemed as though he really wanted that relationship to work. And then something switched like later on in the books, and suddenly he suddenly switched, and it's very easy for him to turn her into this doormat that he could abuse. And how did that happen? Because for me, that was quite a shift in his behavior towards her.
I think it depends on who we're looking at the story's lens of, if that makes sense. Because we got that perception of Joffrey being so lovely, but we got it from Sansa. And Sansa is an unreliable narrator. She's going to see any flaw he makes is going to be, you know, kind of glossed over. And then she'll see the truth of it eventually. But it's like in that initial thing, it not only shows Joffrey's manipulation, like Joffrey was good at manipulating her, but she was so susceptible to that kind of manipulation. It's only when she becomes less susceptible that she becomes more of a reliable narrator.
I'm pretty sure in some of I'm pretty sure in some of Sansa's perspectives, she does actually see Joffrey doing things and then makes it more reasonable in her mind. Like she's like, oh, he's doing this terrible thing, but he's just angry because of this. When it's actually that Joffrey is like pure evil. I hate Joffrey so much.
I think the first time we find out that he's kind of twisted is in like the 7th chapter, I think, where he starts fighting with Robb with like a wooden sword, and then he has like a little bitch fit and is like, no, bring me proper steel. And we don't see that from Sansa's perspective, we see that from Arya's. So I thought that was quite interesting. Like we kind of know something's not right from the off, but then Sansa keeps kind of trying to kind of make you feel a different way about him through a lot of this book.
I actually wrote this quote down because I thought it was so funny. Because Jon and Arya were sitting there together watching all this unfold, and he literally says, "Joff truly is a little shit." And I was like,
I loved that. I loved that quote.
Which plays into this idea that Jon is one of those characters from the beginning that kind of sees things for what they are, to an extent, of course, maybe not necessarily when it pertains to himself. But when it looking at everything else, he is very perceptive of things around him.
And definitely, like, also how Sansa kind of perceives it, like, oh, he did this one nice thing for me. It's like when this person rescued this person. No, it isn't! It what? She's just, like, got this crazy idolization and given him this stupid hero complex, which just doesn't help.
Can we also talk about where Tyrion slapped him, though? That was great.
That was great.
Yes.
Like,
I loved that.
Yeah, I'm surprised we actually haven't talked, like, we haven't discussed Tyrion. And, like,
oh god, yeah, we've had no Tyrion discussion.
Like, Tyrion is on a fucking pedestal, you know? I mean, I love Tyrion, don't get me wrong. Like, I do love Tyrion. It's so funny going through the series that you, as a whole, root for the Stark, but when it comes down to individual characters, like, the Lannisters are actually, like, my favorite. Even though I don't want them to, like, win. Yeah. But I love Jaime. I love Tyrion. I mean, I love to read Cersei. I don't necessarily love her as a character, but I mean, she is entertaining. You just don't know what's going to happen with her. But you want the Starks to win, but personally, like, I love the Lannisters.
Yeah. Rereading this, though, has definitely made me question my love for Jaime now, because he did some questionable stuff in that first book. And now I'm like, why do I like him now?
Which for me plays into the whole scene thing. Is like, in the very first book, we only get everyone else's perspective. We're told who Jaime Lannister is. And then we actually get his perspective, and it's like, wait a second, this isn't at all what I thought was happening. You know?
I feel like, it's very rich for people to be like, oh, what do they call him? King Slayer, right? They'll be like, King Slayer, King Slayer. But in the same breath, they'll talk about the Mad King. And there's this hypocrisy. And that's one of the things that annoyed me the most about Ned is, like, you cannot be so blind. You cannot have one rule for yourself and one rule for another. That is such blatant hypocrisy, and it's so frustrating to have to deal with.
Yeah, I actually wrote a note. That's one of the reasons why, like, I get so frustrated with Ned is because he is mad at Jaime for forsaking his oath and killing the king. But it's like, you also swore an oath to the crown, and you rebelled. Like,
and what was he going to do when he was going to get there? He was going to kill the king anyway.
Right, yeah. It's like, Jaime did your dirty work for you, and you're mad about it. And, like, if he was, I think Jaime was like 16 or 17 when this happened as 17. Well. So, I mean, he's very, very young. So, I don't know. Ned he gets me so mad sometimes because he's so worked up.
I feel like he kind of holds a grudge against Jaime a little bit as well, because when he did defeat the Mad King, he, like, seemed like he was going to go sit in the throne, and Ned was like,
Yeah.
I mean, but, like, for me, it's like, why did Robert deserve it so much? I mean, to be fair, he wouldn't have won that. Like, basically, the only reason why he was able to storm King's Landing was because of the Lannisters. Like, he would be nothing without the Lannisters. So I don't know. I mean, I know why, but it's frustrating.
In essence, the Lannisters are the ones on the throne, though. Like, that's made so explicitly clear when you know about the debt.
Which brings me to another. Which upon my first read, it's one of George R.R. Martin's subtle ways of foreshadowing things. If you notice, Cersei is always known as Cersei Lannister. She's never noted as Cersei Baratheon.
No.
So I thought that, like, I never picked up on it, but upon rereads, I was like, holy shit! Like, he was just literally saying it out loud. Like, there's something going on that we're not picking up on.
I think that the Lannisters are very interesting because all three of them are very different. Like, Tyrion is part of this, like, they're essentially a horrible family. Like, you can like them, but they are on the, like, if we're going to go good and evil, they're on, like, the evil side of the spectrum in, like, the whole storyline. But Tyrion is very much like committed to his family, yet still not as bad as Cersei and Jaime. But then Jaime isn't as bad as Cersei either, and obviously we'll talk about this later, but throughout the series, Jaime has character progression that is like very different to Cersei's character progression, and all three of them are very, very different. But then you have Tywin, who is like definitely like one of the bad guys.
Yeah.
I feel like Tyrion is like, it's like, if you want to put it down, like Tyrion is like chaotic good. Like he's a good guy. And he's the amazing thing about Tyrion, I know Ryan really wanted to talk about Tyrion, so I really want to hear what he has to say. But like Tyrion is so self-aware. He is so blunt. He is so honest, and he presents himself in a way that he can pick up on what other people are saying, but you cannot fault him and you cannot misinterpret what he's saying because he's so blunt. And I feel like that's one of the things I respected the most about him, because he's so logical. And personally, to me, like, logic is everything. So I just admire that so much in a character. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean I'm blind to like seeing his faults. And I feel like some people who really like him, I'm really interested in how you're going to react to some things he does in the later books. And I feel like Ashley kind of knows what I'm trying to say, because but yeah.
No, you're scaring me.
I know.
Okay, Ryan, what did you want to say about Tyrion? Because he was one of the characters that you most wanted to discuss.
I think like Zafina's pretty much touched on it there. But yeah, he's so honest and direct, and to like he knows it, the point he wants to make, and he just gets it across in like the blunt, most forward way. And Tyrion knows where he is. He knows he's an imp. He's frowned upon by his family, and he has nowhere to go but up. And I think that's why I like the relationship so much with Jon, because they share that like bastard and imp and exiled from their families similarity. And is it in the I don't know what chapter it's in. It's when Jon and Tyrion are making their way up to the wall. Jon says something like, "Don't call me a bastard." Is that right?
Yes.
And, yeah. So Jon's like, "Don't call me a bastard," and he's like, "Well, that's what you are. You are a bastard."
I've got the quote, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I think I've got it here. So it's never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Make it your strength, then it can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you.
Right, and doesn't that resonate with Tyrion as a character? You think of that quote and you see that within Tyrion. He embodies that.
Just like he's being called imp all the time, and then he just like, yeah, I am an imp.
Yeah.
And what? There's a number of quotes that go along with him, like taking over the words for himself. And it's something that he tells Jon as well. It's just like, yeah, you're a bastard.
It's a reclamation, really, and it's a powerful reclamation.
And it's something which he should learn to own, which I think he does learn to own eventually. Like, we see him come to terms with it. But I feel like, to me, Tyrion is Jon's main guidance throughout this story. Even when they're not together, it seems that it seems like Jon always remembers what Tyrion has said and what Tyrion has taught him. And then also when we get to the wall, there's a really interesting part where I think they're on top of the wall, and Tyrion's saying, "Oh, sorry, Becca disappeared." There's a really interesting part where they both stood on the wall, and I feel like, I can't remember the quote, if anyone's got it to hand. They stood on top of the wall, and it's like looking out onto the edge of the world, or something along those lines. I really can't remember the quote, and I'm going to have to find it because it's going to annoy me, but it says a lot about their relationship.
Yeah. One of my favourite Tyrion quotes, sorry, go on.
No, go for it.
Is when he says, I think it might be to Bran or Robb, when he goes back and tries to give that kind of saddle to Bram even.
Yes.
He says, I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples, bastards and broken bones.
Yes.
And I just love that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Ryan.
No. If anyone would like to chime in about Tyrion and Jon, or Tyrion, or whoever.
Anna has put in the chat, what do we think of Tyrion being referred to as imp all the time?
I think we kind of a little bit kind of touched on that because I did see that quote, so I wanted to kind of bring it into the conversation. It's just the fact that about him reclaiming it and just being like, look, this is a word that the world will never forget who I am. And so this is who I am, and taking it for yourself. And I posted a quote in the chat as well, which is, let them see that their words can cut you and you'll never be free of the mockery. If they want to give you a name, take it, make it your own. They can never hurt you with it anymore. And it's kind of what he does. It's what he does with imp. It's what he tells John to do with the word bastard. And also cripple.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
But I feel like Bran doesn't get a moment to have that armoring with the word as John does with bastard, simply because the direction his narrative takes is in summer.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I'm not gonna spoil.
Oh, I also like. Sorry, just really want to get this in there.
Go on.
I also like that the word friend is used. I think one of them says it to the other.
I was gonna ask, do you mean like the final like quote where he says, thank you, what is it? You're asking a lame man to teach a cripple how to dance, Tyrion said. However sincere the lesson, the result is likely to be grotesque. Still, I know what it is to love a brother, Lord Snow. I will give Bran whatever small help is in my power. Thank you, my Lord Lannister. He pulled off his glove and offered his bare hand. Friend. Tyrion found himself oddly touched. Most of my kin are bastards, he said with a wry smile. But you're the first I've had to friend. And then like they just like hold hand by hand, and it's just like
right. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because that like defines their relationship and their friendship, and hopefully we get to see that blossom. Oh, and quick point, Tyrion's returning to Winterfell in the final series of the TV show, and I'm really excited for that.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yes.
Okay. Which brings me on to what I was going to say is, are we all ready to talk about spoilers and foreshadowing now? Okay, so if you are watching the live show and you are not up to date with the TV show, then I would recommend that you leave so you're not spoiled. So we'll give them like a few seconds.
A few seconds. Go.
And I'm going to soundtrack it with coughing.
Classy.
Sorry. I know, that's me.
The opening that dun 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 dun
Dun, dun,
dun.
Bye, Hannah. Sorry, I just
Bye, Hannah.
Bye, Haley.
Oh, bye, Haley.
Hey.
Okay. Can we go?
Yes.
I think we're okay.
Oh gosh.
Okay.
Where do we even begin?
Right.
Okay,
So I wanted.
I just wanted to say about the dogs real quick, just so we can touch the direwolves and then just like
That's literally what I was going to say as well. But go on.
great minds just so synced. It's like our stories like are just so aligned and like mirror each other so well. Okay, so I think we were talking about how like Nymeria mimics Arya's story, and I just wanted to say that like Nymeria's story was essentially, you know, she went across the narrow sea with her people or not, right? And it's kind of like Arya with her list of names. I feel like it's her carrying the burden of this list of names that she's taking across the narrow sea and she's going to take back with her. Like she takes it with her and she takes it back with her. So I don't know. That's what I kind of took from the name Nymeria.
I don't know. I feel like, I don't know if it pertains to it. It may be different in the books than in the show, but I actually put a quote of talking about the actual Nymeria. It says, warrior queen of the Rhoyne who led her people across the narrow sea. So I want to say, I think it's Arya coming back to Westeros. I feel like she's going to have a lot of, maybe it's like all the faces that she has, you know, like all the people, you know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Oh, that's a literal way of taking it. I see that.
So, okay. Oh.
And the other one, like Shaggy Dog, that's like Rickon. He's going to be out there by himself.
He's basically going to be a wildling.
He's literally going to be a shaggy dog. There we go.
So what I wanted to say about the direwolves is like it's kind of like a broad thing, and in the first chapter they're talking about how the direwolves were born in death because they think that the mother gave birth after she'd already died, and they said that was a bad omen. And I just think that it's like perfectly just like describes what happens to all of the Starks. Like the Starks are pretty much cursed from the beginning of this book, and for a lot of them, when their direwolves die, they also die. The exceptions being Nymeria, who goes off like on the run, and so does Arya. And then the only one that's different is Lady for Sansa, but Sansa's naivete and the way that she views the world dies shortly after Lady does.
Yeah.
And then the only wolves that are alive are Arya's. Like up to the show at the minute, the only ones that are alive are Arya's and Jon's. And then there's only Bran and Sansa who are
Where the hell is
the living
Nymeria?
Starks.
Is she gonna come back? I miss her.
Well, maybe she did, but like,
Wow.
She did in the show, but I don't know if she's gonna
mm.
put it in the books.
So Tyrion has this conversation with Jon when he's on the Night's Watch with him, and they have a conversation about dragons. And Jon asks Tyrion, "What are you reading about?" And Tyrion says that he's reading about dragons, and Jon says, "Well, and what's the point in that? Because there are no dragons anymore." And Tyrion starts to tell him this story about the dreams that he has about dragons, and dreams of his personal dragon burning down brothels and barrels in Casterly Rock. And he said, "Don't look at me that way, bastard. Surely you've had these dreams. Everybody has these dreams." But maybe just because he has had these dreams doesn't mean that everybody has had those dreams. And I find it very telling that he's having that conversation with Jon, because Jon would potentially agree with him if everyone in the chats has got to where we are with the television series. Then for me, like, I really want it to happen. And the fact that Tywin absolutely hates Tyrion, and Tywin Lannister loves Cersei, loves Jaime, thinks that they're fantastic. And I find it very strange that he doesn't like Tyrion just because he's an imp. That doesn't really make sense to me, like listening to the way they talk about familial loyalty.
The thing with Tywin is that obviously a very big part of the house is they're very rich, right? Or at least they were very rich. But other than that, they're a very militarily driven family. Like the Reigns of Castamere, like people talk about it. It's a very militarily driven story, you know? And so as a dwarf, he's at a physical disadvantage, which basically redacts from the whole Lannister thought, like the lion. When you think of a lion, you think this big, strong, courageous creature. And
he's a weak point.
Exactly. And that's kind of part of it. But also, especially with some people do believe, 3 heads of a dragon. And some people do believe that this is a spoiler section, so I'm going to say a thing. Some people believe that Tyrion is, one of, like, a son of adultery.
I do.
Tywin,
I do.
Wife basically had sex with someone else, and that's why she really, really hate. Like he really.
I think it was a Targaryen as well, wasn't it?
I think it was
Yes.
the Mad King, right? When he took her as his, when he got married to her.
I just love that Rachel's whispering along like, yes.
So there's that, and so there's this idea that 3 heads of a dragon, and they're all by different Targaryen. People in the family. So you got Dany, who's quite right in your face. You got Jon. And then you got Tyrion, and it's just like,
Sorry, I was gonna say, can we also talk about how he's described in the book? Because he's described as having like really, really light blonde hair, like a lot lighter than Jaime and Cersei. So as soon as I read that, I forgot, and I was like, okay, it's confirmed. It's confirmed. So
exactly,
really it's not.
And his. I don't want to say it's an abnormality because dwarfism can happen to anyone and it's not necessarily a negative attribute. However, seeing as there is so much incest within the Targaryen line, it wouldn't be unsurprising if that had a biological consequence onto their offspring. If Tyrion was a Targaryen. Personally, it's like, I see the theory, I get it. I'm not going to say I completely, like, whatever. Like, R and L, that's fucking, we know. We don't know. But with Tyrion, it's just like, the reason I kind of don't want to fully believe it, at least maybe it's not completely canonized in the TV show aspect, is because Viserion is now dead. And if there's meant to be a rider for every dragon, we can easily say that Rhaegal will be ridden by Jon because that's essentially named after his father. But Viserion there's no real tie between Viserys and Tyrion, and also now he's dead. It kind of like it redacts from the idea that there are 3 Targaryens and there are 3 heads of the dragon.
But
You know
does
what I
that
mean?
hint at a potential death?
Possibly.
That's what I don't want to happen.
Let's be real.
The
They're not all 3
foreboding.
of them are not going to be standing at the end.
That's not gonna happen. Yeah,
No.
Picked up on quite
At least one is gonna die.
I feel like I feel like ultimately the main thing is like, as much as I love Tyrion, it's going to be probably between Don and Janny. Don and Janny. Oh my god!
No, we're mixing up their names.
Jesus Christ! Yeah, like that's my ship name now. But no,
Yeah.
That's your ship.
simply because
Janny.
because they kind of go through the most epic arcs leading up to a point of power. Unlike Arya, who's definitely has an epic arc, but it's not she's not trying to get to a point of power.
Don't do it to Miss Avena. Don't do it. Don't say it.
What? No, I don't want her to. I'm not saying she's going to
Ryan
die.
is adamant that Arya's not going to die and that she's like 100% safe, and I don't think it's true. He says she's the most loved character, and I'm like, well, I don't love her that much, so like she could die.
Yeah.
I just feel like
with her.
Sorry, Ashley?
But George R.R. Martin's, in an interview, George R.R. Martin's wife, that's his favorite character, and she said that she would divorce George if anything ever happened to Arya. Whether or not that's
fair enough.
Yeah. If that's true or not, but that it was said in an interview. But speaking of Tyrion, I can't confirm obviously the Targaryen. I'm kind of still on the fence about it as well, but I do think that Tyrion is destined for something really big because there are numerous passages where there's emphasis on Tyrion being a giant among. I got like 3 or 4 quotes just here talking about how Tyrion stood as tall as a king. Someone said, "I think he is a giant come among us." And then he even has a dream where he was when he was in the sky cell, where he was not the prisoner, but he was this big giant person. And then Shay calls him my giant of Lannister all the time. And I just feel like that's just George's way of saying, like, I don't know what it is, but Tyrion's fate in this series, he's going to play a very pivotal role in whatever's happening.
I can see that happening.
Yeah.
Don't you think it would be so funny if everyone dies and Tyrion is the one who ends up on the throne? Like, I just feel like, fuck you all. You doubted him this entire time. You were like, oh, he has a, he's a, and now he's like,
Can you guys believe that Can you guys believe that we have like so little episodes left in the actual television series?
Don't.
It's like,
and we only have a month until it happens.
I'm just no.
Do you know it's on TV for less than a month? How it works out?
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wait, aren't there only 6 episodes?
There's 6 episodes, but the way that it falls, if you look at the dates of the airing, I'm pretty sure it's like 4 weeks or 5 weeks. So it's like the smallest amount of time ever.
Oh my god.
We get a trailer tomorrow, right? Do we get the trailer tomorrow? I think I've seen it.
What?
That would be exciting.
I don't know if it's this Monday, but sorry if that's not true, but that would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
That's something definitely to discuss in the next live show.
Google right now.
So I kind of wanted to run something by you guys, and I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure if this is like a foreshadowing kind of thing, or it's a pattern, or if it's lazy writing.
Ooh.
So every time a character that is going to die leaves, they tell somebody they have something important to tell them when they come back.
Ned did that.
Ned does it to Jon. Ben does it to Jon. Rob does it to Ned. And every time that they leave, they die. They never come back. Well, Ben, maybe. Like, he does come back. It's not confirmed. I don't think the books go that far. But essentially, every time a character goes to die, they have something important to tell somebody. Like, do you think that it's a pattern?
Kill each other!
Well, it's
like, do you think it's a pattern or foreshadowing, or is it lazy writing? Is that the way that George R.R. Martin just like kills people?
I think that it's just the tension build up.
But when it's like repetitive, it's not effective. Really, like for us having like watched the show and then going back, like we know, so it's like really noticeable. But I'm sure people who read the book would think like, hang on, this happened not long ago, and now this character's like dead. So then they'd like expect it.
I do kind of feel like this sits heavily on one of the errors of his writing, where like I feel like Martin can kind of settle for false tension. Sorry, my mom just walked in with like gold all over her face. But he kind of gives this false tension, and it's kind of cheap. I do agree, but I feel like it kind of isn't the case later on. But I feel like when he's like, "Oh, I have something important to tell you," there's someone else who knows. In the case of even when we were talking about John, and like the birthing and stuff like that, the only person who knew was Ned, but there were also wet nurses.
Yeah.
And his friend, what's his last name? Paul or something? There was a friend, I think.
Vayon.
Yeah.
And he was, his like children, help out Bran. So it's kind of like there are more people who know.
Yeah.
Essentially.
In one of the last Ned scenes, he says, "Oh, I really wish that I could see John now and really have that conversation that we've needed to have all this time." And it's like, reading it from someone who kind of knows what he needs to know, it's so infuriating. But if you were reading it, having not watched the television show and having read the books, that I think that might go over your head a little bit. Like, you might think, oh yeah, there's something that he needs to tell him, but there's so much else going on that maybe it's intentional, but I think that he does it so often that I think it's more of just a plot device that he uses to build tension. I think he
really couldn't tell because
but often
everything that he does seems quite intentional, especially with the foreshadowing that like foreshadows things that happen like many books in the future. So like I didn't feel like it could be lazy writing or just like a repetitive like plot device. So I felt like it did mean something more, but at the same time I'm like, well, I can't really see how it does. So I thought I'd run it by everybody and see what they thought.
Silent.
Any more foreshadowing? Anything? Anybody?
Everything is foreshadowing. I swear. Like,
Yeah.
you had that first omen at the beginning where the direwolf's mum was dead with a stag antler through
yes.
it.
Yes.
Oh god, yeah.
Everything is like linking to something else, and we just don't know it yet. I think.
I think it's also every single noble house's name, which I've not got them all written down, but you've got every single noble house has its words and its family mottos, its touchstones, its prayers. And one of the quotes is that all these families have them apart from the Starks. Winter is coming, said the Stark words. So winter is coming isn't meant to be like the family motto, and it's not meant to be the words of a prayer like it is like the Lannisters always pay their debts. And all the other houses, but for the Starks, there's this strong connection with winter is coming. And is that because of Bran? How did the family get those words?
I just want to quickly mention on what you said. The actual Lannister words are "Hear me roar," but
oh really?
Like it's just become so common for them to say the words.
Oh, that's actually mentioned in the TV show as well.
Yeah, but no, you're completely right. And on the aspect of this, I feel like if there were true Stark words, they've been lost with time because they've put their significance, like the Night's Watch, into a concept, and a concept that outdates the people who set that concept into place, similarly with Brandon the Builder, right? And I feel like it definitely does tie in the aspect that Brandon was a Stark. And I feel like in turn this idea of being predated gives this mysticism towards the Crypt of Winterfell a bit more, and I feel like the books are probably going to establish more of a weight to them than the TV show has, because so far the only significance is like some scenes that happens in the crypt in the TV show and then like the trailer that we got, but we all know that there's definitely more to the crypts with how they are referred to within the books.
Yeah, and there's a couple of dreams where Bran and Rickon have the same dream, right? Where they end up with them being in the crypt. So it's not just those two that are having those dreams. It's Jon as well when he's at the wall. He dreams where he sees Ned in the crypts. And there's more there, isn't there? Definitely more there.
So are we going to talk about how Bran may possibly be every Bran?
Ooh.
Because I have also noticed, aside from the general stories and the rumors and the theories, sorry, I'm dying. there seems to be a Brandon in every generation of Starks.
Ooh.
And there isn't a Rob in every generation. There isn't, I think Ned's dad is called Rickard, so there's Rickon. And the only name that is really consistent through the time periods and like through all the histories is Bran. Starting from, I think, is the first one, Bran the Builder. Is he the one who founded House Winterfell?
he's like
But
the
then Ned's
earliest
brother
one, yeah.
is
Brandon
as
was
well.
the one who
He's a
actually
Brandon.
erected Winterfell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Ashley, when you tweeted and said no spoilers, but listen to what Old Nan is saying, was it the brands that you were referring to? Where she says all the brands blend together in her mind.
Yeah, because Mother told him once that all Starks had become one person in her head. And especially with the TV shows, there is like this really large theory that all Brandons are the same person. But I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I mean that would mean that Brandon, as in Ned's brother, was also. But then again, he dies before Bran, so I don't know.
I don't think there's ever two Brands alive at the same time. And don't you think that the naming of the Starks is weird? Like, he named his oldest son after his best friend. He named Jon after his like foster father. Bran is the family name, and then he named his last son after his dad. Like, the naming seems to be really weird, and there's like a not too much time in between Bran being born and like the previous Bran dying before that.
It definitely does feel like it feeds into the idea that when Bran was like, I'm seeing, like, he, you know, it's in the most recent season when he's like, oh, I can see everything, the past, future, and present at the same time, and like it's kind of hard to decipher things at points. So it definitely feeds into the whole all Brandons are one theory. But I feel like some people try and use that theory to make Bran the Night King, which I don't think is the case.
Yeah,
simply because there is literally a man who was, you know, by the children of the forest.
The children of the forest.
Exactly. And it's just like, I don't know. I feel like that's putting too much weight on Brandon's story. And especially considering that there's only, I'm pretty sure, 6 episodes of the final season.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to go with that plot line, even if that was the original case or anything. I feel like they're going to go for something that's way more simpler, because they have so many other like ends to tie up.
No, agree.
Yeah, something that I kind of want to ask you guys is about so a lot of people refer to the White Walkers as the others, but Old Nan, she's having a conversation with Bran, and she mentions the White Walkers moving through the woods, and Bran says, "You mean the others?" And she's like, "The others, yeah." But some people call them the White Walkers, and I think they're people that tend to be more kind of the prophecy people who talk about them. But for the rest of Winterfell, for the rest of Westeros, they call them the others when they're talking about them in terms of like the childhood stories. And I found it inconsistent. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, like why some people called them the others and some people called them White Walkers.
Could it be that the people who believe in the children of the forest and the old gods are the ones that refer to them as the White Walkers?
Potentially.
I definitely feel like that's the case, and also it goes into the fact that there are different there's a hierarchy there, you know?
Yeah.
There's the White Walkers who actually make the army of the dead. They are not synonymous. Meanwhile, people who might be more skeptical or more cynical and just essentially don't really believe and think it's just a story, they're just gonna generalize them all as being the others. At least that's my take. If anyone else has anything else.
I really can't wait to learn more about the children of the forest. I highlighted loads of things that they were mentioned. Are they? Because
it depends. Yeah.
Okay.
My main thing is like, actually, I want to touch on and get some opinions here. Bran, in his first vision, where he imagines himself falling, saw beyond the shadowlands of the Shire. He saw dragons waking up, and that already gives off the essential truth that dragons are alive, just at a different point in time. And Daenerys was told that beyond the lands of Ashai, the Shadowlands of Ashai, there are no dragons. But Bran's already confirmed there are. And I'm really curious because now Martin has set up this world that there are dragons elsewhere. There's dragons at the end of this book, and you just wonder, like, this world is so big, and we're seeing such a tiny part of it. I'm just interested to see how, like, the rest of the world have implications on, what's happening in Westeros and how that has an implication on the others, because it just seems like there's so much more going on, and it kind of really puts weight on how tiny our perspective is.
Yeah, because we are just focusing on this one section, and the time period, and obviously having no technology means that they would not be aware of what's going on outside of where they are either. But I think the dragons are originally from the east, aren't they?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure Ashai is like, I cannot completely remember, but I'm pretty sure it's like far off the east. I think beyond the Dothraki Sea, I'm not sure, and the mountains of Yeti, I'm not completely sure. But
then I also tapped the prophecy that they're from the moon. Like, I don't think that that's true, but like it was just another like sort of legend of where the dragons originated from.
I feel like you just made a great point, because I feel like that really syncs up to how Dany knew about how to wake up the dragons, because the Dothraki said that it's that she's the moon is the wife of the sun, and when they kiss, like whatever, like when like the one moon is going to kiss the other moon or the sun, then the dragons will be released again. And I feel like that's literally what happens at the end. Dany has this final essential kiss of goodbye with her husband at his funeral pyre, and that's what awakens the dragons. So it's kind of, I thought it was very interesting foreshadowing to show these two contradictory ways of portraying this prophecy, but then they come together to the conclusion of the book, and it's really interesting to see in a reread, because now I'm like, in what other poetic ways does Martin implement what's going to happen in this story?
During that scene, though, doesn't she also say something about Khal Drogo will come back? And I can't quite remember because I didn't put any notes down. It was an audiobook, but as she's saying goodbye, right?
It says, when the sun rises on the west and sets in the east, and the mountains blow like leaves, and your womb quickens with child, then the Khal Drogo will return. No, I'm wondering if she's going to end up pregnant.
Same.
And then I'm like, well, Khal Drogo has to return. Like, I don't think that's going to happen, but like, based on that prophecy,
how can the sun?
But he could rise.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, he could rise as a White Walker. Sorry.
Oh my god.
But she burnt his body.
She did burn his body because she kind of like.
I think that was kind of more so in a sense of, she knows it's kind of the impossible. So in another dimension, in another universe, and in the next stage of life, that's reunited. Because I do feel like Drogo is not maybe her true love, but it's like that's her love, and then anyone after is just kind of like temporary.
Yeah.
And like even if sorry, real quick, Rachel, even if like we go into like Dany and Jon, I do feel like they're so perfectly synced for each other, but also it's kind of like they've had these loves before, they've had this loss before, and now they're in a position where no one else will understand them on the level that they're at now, but it doesn't downplay the weight of the loves they had. Go ahead, Rachel.
Sorry, it's just Plots and Points said something so awesome in the chat and said that Dany is the moon of Drogo's life and Drogo is her sun and stars. Coincidence? ?
Definitely plays into it. Yeah.
Wow. What do you guys think about the comet? Because I noticed in the book that it only turns up about 2/3 of the way through, and 2 people see it. It seems to be a new addition, but nobody questions it. But I've heard, like, I don't know the theories, but I'm pretty sure there are theories that go into the significance of the comet. But it's weird that it just turned up. Like, I think, was it the Maester that was in Winterfell looked at the sky and was like, oh, there's a comet there? And then somebody else noticed it, I think, at King's Landing.
Did no one notice it where Daenerys was?
Yeah, she did.
Oh, was it Daenerys that noticed it? I know it was noticed at least twice, but early on in the book, it wasn't there. And then, like, towards the end, 3 people noticed it in a short space of time.
I think there was, like, another prophecy, but I can't remember it right now, wherein the comet has significance. but I can't fully remember right now. So you're gonna have to like.
Magic, I know that. Like the comet's supposed to bring magic or something like that.
Yeah. It was like there's a lot of strength put into like astral stuff and whatnot, and I feel like that's when there was enough magic or something like that, because I know the dragons themselves have power and they have magic within them, and Daenerys has dragon blood, so it helps enable that power. But maybe there is some magic that came from the comet which perfectly aligned because she has the dragons, which in turn like allowed her to awaken the dragons. So maybe it was beyond just the sacrifice of a life to awaken them, but also the comet.
This is what Wiki is saying. Wiki is saying that the red comet is a messenger, or the red sword, and it was directly related to the dragons, and that it's an astronomical phenomenon. And yeah, they're basically saying that it's related to dragons.
Okay. Which also feeds into the theory or the Dothraki belief that dragons came from a moon, like a second moon.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something to do with like astronomy and the stars.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, do we have any more foreshadowing things to discuss?
I have a theory. There's like no basis for this. I just feel it in my gut that the raven, like the three-eyed raven in Bran's dreams, is actually the raven that Mormont always has. I just feel like there's just something with that. Like, that's not a normal crow. There's something else going on.
He is not a normal crow.
And there's definitely like some kind of tie, because Mormont feeds a crow corn, and then like Bran wants to feed the crow corn, and I felt like there was something going on there. Yeah.
And I feel like eventually, maybe if the series is ever completed, that every now and then the crow will start saying not like just one word that's not corn. I feel like if you take all those words at the end of the series, it's going to spell out something. Like it'll
like
not
the jaw thing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I try to pick up like what he's saying, and right now, unless you like mix it up, it doesn't make any sense. So I think it's all jumbled, but I feel like at the end it'll all make sense.
Please release your final book, Martin. Please.
Yeah, right.
I was thinking when Ashley said that it's now gone from when the final book is released to if the final book is released. Like we're not sure it's actually ever coming.
We're gonna need some real good fan fiction if that doesn't happen.
Oh god.
Oh gotcha.
At least we have the series to deal with. I mean, but I just want to know like how. I know it's really taking a turn. Like there's just so many things that they've left out that there's no way that it's even remotely close.
Yeah.
But I feel like the ending is going to be the same. But I think I read that in an interview which makes me so mad because I don't want to know the ending before I read it. But that might be my only option at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just want to know what's going to be bittersweet about it, because that was one thing that was confirmed, that it was going to be bittersweet. Like
I think it's always going to be bittersweet because at the moment we're down to characters that we really love. I mean, Cersei's like debatable because you could still say that she stands on the side of evil. Like I appreciate her character growth, but I don't necessarily like her.
Mm-hmm.
Like she has a really good character. But aside from that, everybody is somebody that we like, and they're not all going to survive. So it's always going to be bittersweet for at least somebody.
I feel like considering this is the show, because I'm pretty sure our next show is probably going to be after the episodes have started airing.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I'm going to just throw it out there. So there's a prophecy that Cersei's going to be killed by her little brother. Jaime came out after Cersei. It is very unlikely that Tyrion is going to be the one that kills her, but it does play into the bias that she has that her mother died giving birth, and then also she might think that, oh, her little brother Tyrion's going to kill her. But I actually think it's going to be Jaime.
I agree.
She's the Mad
I
Queen,
think it's going to be Jaime.
I
think he's going to do it for love because she's turned into a monster.
Mm-hmm.
She has nothing to live for apart from Jaime, and he's walked away from her. And I think that now that he's on the side of good, that he's going to have to kill her, and that he would rather be the one than somebody else.
And he's
if she has to die.
He's the only one who can get close enough, and he will then be called Royalty Slayer.
Right? Queen Slayer.
Yeah, I think that's where the show really I don't want to say messes up, but I feel like they really dropped the ball on Jaime, because I feel like his character arc is so much better in the books than Jacob Gray in the show, because they make it seem like Jaime is much more on Cersei's side for a lot longer than it is in the books. Like, after he comes to King's Landing with Brienne again and he leaves off, he goes somewhere like near the Riverlands, and like Cersei sends him a letter like, you need to come back now, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. But yeah, they made it seem like he was attached to Cersei a lot longer than it was in the book.
Okay, so is that about everything?
Oh my god, we could go on for hours, but literally, I can't.
We
wait
already
to
have.
start
We've
the
been here
next
2.5.
I know.
I think the next one may be on my birthday if we do the first Sunday of the month following. And Ryan will be here with
I
me.
will be with you.
Yeah, he will be here with me. We'll put him here.
That's
It'd be great. Yeah.
Oh,
Right, so
I do
sorry?
have one. There was in one of Brand's dreams. I haven't figured out who this person is, but so in one of his dreams, he says, one shadow was dark as ash with the terrible face of a hound, which we obviously know that's
The hound.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like the sun, golden and beautiful, obviously the Lannisters, and then it says, over them loomed a giant in armor made of stone.
Stone.
Who that is?
A giant made of stone. A dragon?
The mountain comes to mind, but I
Yeah.
don't think it is.
No, not the mountain, I don't think.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm like, a stone. I feel like stone
Stone
is the key,
for some reason.
but I can't think
Are there
of
any particular landmarks that it could be?
Dragonstone?
Dragonstone.
Isn't there a gate in one of the countries that is two like guys with swords out
I don't know.
crossed, and that's like a gate into Where Are You goes, where the many-faced god temple is?
Oh, yeah.
Bravo, a giant
Bravo,
arm
yeah.
made of stone.
But I
know.
don't see, like, they're all moving to Westeros, so I don't see how that could
Maybe
be
it's Tyrion.
relevant.
Maybe Tyrion, because he thinks he's like big.
He is Tyrion because he's always referred to as like a giant,
Yeah.
but made of stone. Wait, because in the future books he thinks he gets touched by the stone men, like the grayscale, like in the later books, but he doesn't actually get touched.
That's Jorah.
It's Jorah.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Oh, sorry. Just before we finish, I actually I highlighted something which is really, really interesting. They were talking about Stannis Baratheon and saying what a shame that his daughter was born so ugly. And having watched the television series and knowing that Stannis Baratheon's daughter was actually born or contracted this affliction where the flesh turns into stone and it had taken over part of her face, it was literally just mentioned once in the book. And I just think the thing is, like, when you're an incredible writer, when you really know exactly what's going to happen with each of your characters when you're writing it, and you don't need to make it a big deal. You just kind of throw it in there and you know it, but nobody else knows it. And then this is fantastic when you're rereading because you really pick up on those small little Easter eggs and it makes the experience so much more worthwhile.
Definitely everything with Stannis, like, you have to read into that to be able to really comprehend why Stannis was on Dragonstone. But yeah, defo.
Yeah.
And just for those who have read it, what do we think about Lady Stoneheart? Do you think she'll make a return?
In the show?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Because I feel like they gave Arya her plotline.
Yeah, I get that too. But there's been kind of theories being like, oh, maybe there'll be a new character and it'll be someone that we already know. And I'm like, oh, I hope so, but I don't think they're going to do that, are they?
Gendry's just going to appear again, coming out of another boat. Like,
oh, Gendry.
Okay, so do we have anything else?
Final thoughts. I feel like Gendry is actually going to be the one who ends up on the throne because the introduction to the Game of Thrones, it always ends up with a Baratheon sigil and then it shows the logo and I'm just like, I bet everyone's going to die and it's going to be a Baratheon. But yeah, that's another prediction, which I hope isn't the case. Yeah. Okay, I'm done now.
Safina, it's okay. We have like 4 more of these.
I know.
We have plenty of time. Okay, so any last thoughts?
No, just thank you so much. This was awesome. And I'm so glad that it went down so well.
Oh, that reminds me, the next live show for Clash of Kings will be on Rachel's channel.
Hello.
So all the links to all of the hosts are in the description box below, so you can check everybody out. But if you want to know, like, get the notification when the next live show will be, then it is going to be on Rachel's channel. And you can find the link to that in the description. just while everybody is
Cool.
still here.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that is just about everything. I'm just slowly dying over here. Had a progressive cough. It's got worse. But thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the live show. We definitely delved into a lot of things. Like I knew we would be talking for a while, but this has been like there's just so much. There's so much to pull apart in these books, and they only get longer,
Yeah.
which is worrying.
No.
We're gonna have to have like 2 shows back to back or something like that. I don't think we're gonna be able to discuss it. I don't know, maybe we will. We'll find out, I guess.
I guess we could like split some of them down because I know the UK editions of 2 of the books are split into 2 anyway. So we could possibly like split, like do 2 live shows if we need to, if we feel we need to.
Yeah, like maybe like the first half first in a month and then the second half in another month.
Yeah.
Like that idea, let us know.
Okay. So that's about it. Thank you everybody for watching. And yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 Thank you.